I'm in shock. Check out this review from Alyssa A on our skin, hair, and nails from Heart and Swell Supplements. Alyssa says, I've never written a review in my life, but I just had to with this stuff. I've been taking skin, hair, and nails along with a smaller dose of beef organs for only about 3 weeks, along with switching to a more animal-based diet, cutting out seed oils, gluten, cruciferous vegetables, etc. And I swear the stretch marks I've had for 8+ years are fading away. I was not expecting this at all. I woke up this morning and they had just said peace out overnight. My overall skin is so much smoother and this rash I had on my arm is healing. I can't wait to see if I'll regrow my hair back too. I feel as though my body has been screaming for this lifestyle change for way too long. I hope this review helps any girls or guys who might be a little self-conscious about their stretch marks or hair loss and just want to improve their gut and skin health. I love this stuff, guys. I love reading these reviews and sharing all these ideas with you. We have heard from people that sometimes skin, hair, and nails and animal-based diet will help with skin regrowth. And if you watch me on Instagram, you know that I shared a reel recently about a carnivore diet that improved someone's alopecia areata, autoimmune hair loss. So these dietary methods help get organs in your diet. If you can't get fresh, check us out at Heart and Soil Supplements, heartandsoil.co online, and reclaim your birthright to optimal health. This is why I do what I do, and I'm so proud and grateful to get to do it. I'm also so proud and grateful for this week's podcast. It was 3 hours. I had no idea Derek and I were going to go this long, but we covered all kinds of good information. This is a fun podcast. Derek's a great guy to talk to. We kind of went back and forth a little bit. He's primarily interviewing me for his channel, but I wanted to share it with you guys because we covered a lot of interesting things and some new stuff about metformin, which recently came out. Again, we talked about alopecia areata. I share this Reddit thread of a gentleman who healed his autoimmune hair loss with a carnivore diet, suggesting that intentional dietary change is very powerful for autoimmune illness. So enjoy this podcast that I did with Derek from More Plates, More Dates. Check out his channel on YouTube. Share it with your friends and family. I know that within this 3 hours, you guys will find a ton that will be super, super beneficial. Without further ado, on to the podcast with Derek from More Plates, More Dates.
You mentioned when you moved to Costa Rica, like what prompted that? Like it seems kind of out of the way, no? Or I don't know.
Yes and no. I mean, so I am the type of person who I've learned this about myself over the years that I really am happiest when I have some sort of an activity that involves me like moving in nature, whether it's like skiing or snowboarding or surfing. I like movement. I like jujitsu. I like martial arts, but I love movement in nature. It's Jordan Peterson talks about like taming chaos sometimes. And I think there's something I like about this chaos of the natural world. It's so grounding for me. So I was living in Austin for a few months, maybe 7 or 8 months last year when I moved here to like build Heart and Soil. And then I was living in California before that, surfing. California got crazy with COVID. And I was just feeling kind of cooped up and just like the walls were closing in on me in Austin. Like, what do I do for fun? It's so interesting, man. I think that for me as a human and for most humans, I think we're most productive when we have something that we do every day that we just like to do. That's just freaking fun. It's not productive. It's just fun. And everybody's going to be different. Some people might like, I don't know, people like lifting or CrossFit or ballet or whatever, like ecstatic dance. For me, it's surfing or skiing or snowboarding. And so, yeah, man, there was a winter storm in Austin. I was on my way back from Africa. So I went to Tanzania last year to spend time with the Hadza. And I was on my way back from Africa. I couldn't even get to Austin. I was like, forget it. I'm just going to go to Costa Rica and surf for 8 or 9 days. And 8 or 9 days turned into 2 months, turned into a year plus now.
So is there, when you say building out Heart and Soil, so what people, if you don't know, that's your supplement company that sells like nose to tail nutrition, essentially, right? In capsulated format.
Yeah.
So building that out, you mentioned, is that like the home base of distribution is there too now? Or like how is that conducive to the Heart and Soil growth being in Costa Rica?
Oh, well,
tax benefits or
no. So Heart and Soil is not in Costa Rica. Heart and Soil is here in Austin. But okay. when I built it here, I was like building a team and figuring it all out and like building websites and just trying to figure out how to like really communicate the message and do research about various organs and like why one organ is more interesting than another or which organ we would put in what formulation. So that was what I was doing when I was here and I built an amazing team. And now I have a team here in Austin that basically runs it. And then I do the social media side. I can step away and do the creative stuff on the side from Costa Rica, but all the business operations happen here in Austin.
So one question I have about getting like an efficacious dose of organs per day. So like for me personally, I have an ounce of beef liver a day, and maybe in the future I'll add more organ meats too. But like for me, that seems like a reasonable daily intake where you're not, worried about vitamin A toxicity or anything. But getting that into like a capsule and then getting like an ounce of beef liver per day through ingesting capsules. Like when I think of an ounce, that's like 28 grams of meat. So putting that, like when you guys do dehydrate it to get it into like a serving size that's not like 30 plus capsules, or like how do you make it
exactly work? It's desiccated, so it's freeze dried. So the cool thing about freeze drying is that this is like Laplace's law, like you can lower the pressure on a system, and then you can get the water to the triple point, and you can take the water out of something at freezing temperature. So basically you can sublimate the water. So instead of dehydration happens at 110 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you use Celsius up in Canada?
Yeah. So I don't know why, dude. I don't know why. Like
I think it's smarter.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know the conversions off the top of my head. So 110 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit is how you dehydrate something. So you move the water off of something by heating it. But when you freeze dry something, you can move the water off something by lowering the pressure in the system, and then you can sublimate it. So the water, you can basically dehydrate something in your freezer. And that's what we do with the organs. And the hope is just to preserve as many of the nutrients as possible. Fresh is always best. I think fresh organs are the best, but a lot of people won't do fresh organs, can't stand the taste, or can't access them. So how cool to build like a desiccated organ that is going to help a lot of people and make it so much easier. I thought about like my mom and my sister and my dad when I was building it, and like my friends that would never eat raw liver.
No, yeah, I have tons of friends who won't touch liver for sure. And my mom as well isn't a huge fan. But so yeah, I do see viability in that as like a supplementation, because I know a lot of people would automatically be like, you piece of shit, you're selling supplements, when you're like the food guy who's like all about nutrition, right? But it's like contextual, obviously.
Yeah, you give people the easiest on-ramp possible, and you let them make the change. I think the hope, the greatest hope for all of this is that people will find not only the supplements, but fresh organs, and then transition off the supplements to fresh organs, and then start thinking, oh, well, I took this supplement, I felt better, hopefully, or I started eating liver fresh, or testicle, or spleen, or pancreas, or heart, or whatever, I felt better. Maybe there's something to my diet, the quality of my diet, and my autoimmune disease, libido, body composition. And then it's like this little pebble that has all these ripples, and people make broad sweeping dietary change in their life. But if you give them an easy on-ramp, then they can feel it. Because humans, if we don't feel something, we're not going to really be triggered to change much. So that's the goal.
Okay. So one question I do have about like by descending order of priority. So like obviously beef liver has gotten a lot of hype lately from Liver King. I think before that I had already kind of understood too that it was like, like nature's multivitamin I had heard for years. That was kind of what compelled me to incorporate it into my diet. And when you're only having an ounce a day too, like it's not that bad. Even if you don't like the taste, it's pretty easy to it takes like 2 seconds to eat. So in descending order of, if you were to have somebody like upgrade their diet and introduce these organ meats into their system, is like beef liver the kind of like go-to like totem pole thing that you would have at the top? And then in descending order under that, are there organs that you would recommend like as 2, 3, 4, or is there kind of like a system that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's a system, and that's just kind of like the paradigm that I have in my mind that's maybe based on my experiences with hunter-gatherer tribes and the nutritional quality of various organs. I think liver is the great place to start. I think, like you said, you asked this question, I got distracted from it, but you asked what's an effective dose. I think an ounce of liver, or even half an ounce of liver per day, is an effective dose. It's so high in things like choline, vitamin A, K2, selenium, zinc, copper to balance the zinc, that even a half ounce of liver a day is going to be effective for people. And if you eat half an ounce of liver a day, you're at 3 to 4 ounces a week. That's amazing. That's great for people. And you don't need to get a whole lot more than that. And you mentioned vitamin A toxicity. We can touch on that for a second in a moment. But yeah, I think liver's the first one. Start with liver, whether it's fresh or desiccated. And if you do it fresh, know that the source matters. I would do something high quality from an animal, preferentially eating grass, finished on grass, preferably organic, preferably from a farm that you know the farmer. All raw organs have a risk of contamination. That's just how all raw foods do. Sushi, raw organs, everything has a risk of those things. So if you want to eat raw organs, great. If you have concerns about that stuff or you don't know your source, you can sear it on the outside, you can cook it, or you can do desiccated. But know that any raw organ, any raw food is always going to have a risk of contamination for humans. And then,
that's something we probably should tangent off before I forget. So the risk of contamination, foodborne illness is like, I did a video recently. There was this guy who presumably is trying to kind of like bandwagon off the Liver King hype train. And he's like eating brains and raw eggs and stuff on camera. And he's just like, I can't even tell if he likes it. Like, it seems like he's kind of cringing his way through it a little bit in order to like build a gimmick around it, essentially. But still, like, I'm not discounting the viability of the nutrient density of the organ meats, but at the same time, is the ROI on the risk for eating like a raw brain versus cooking it, like, does it even make sense for the majority of people who don't necessarily know for a fact like where their stuff, like the sanitary practices and whatnot? And I don't know, a bunch of people were commenting that guy's video got like a shit ton of views, like 20 million views or something. Everyone was commenting about prions and like I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, we can talk about that too. So I don't know if there's any known prion diseases in the neural tissue of sheep and lamb. He was eating a lamb brain. I saw it. It's mostly in cows, like the bovine BSE is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. And that's real, but there's never been a case in New Zealand. So, but neural tissue is always a little bit concerning. The thing about prion disease is even if you eat that meat cooked, it doesn't change the prions, from what I understand. So, like when they have had outbreaks of BSE in the UK, even cooked meat can be problematic, or cooked brain tissue can be problematic. So when you're cooking meat, or brains in this case, you'd essentially be destroying any bacteria on the surface of the brain. And that, like you said, is just has somebody wipe their butt and then touch this brain that they sent to you, right? That's the main problem. Like, are you going to get Campylobacter or are you going to get Salmonella? Those are the two bacteria that you worry about with raw eggs as well. And so I think that for people, if they're worried about that kind of foodborne contamination with those GI centric bacteria, cook your food, cook your liver. It's going to be on the outside of the liver. You can cook it. You can cook your eggs if you're worried about it. The other thing is parasites. I think there's not a lot of parasites in a brain, but there definitely occasionally are parasites in livers. If you get good liver from a cow that's grass-fed and grass-finished, and you're familiar with what liver looks like, that's pretty rare, especially if the liver's been pre-frozen. Now, if you look at the literature, you have to really freeze the liver for a long amount of time, or a very deep freeze, the kind of freeze that nobody has in their house, the kind of freeze you find in like molecular biology labs, like -20. That will kill the parasites. But there's some indication that if you freeze the liver for 2 to 3 weeks, and a lot of the liver you might get from like a farm may have been frozen for a few weeks, that's going to decrease the incidence of parasites in the liver. But again, if you're worried about that stuff, just cook the liver or get desiccated. Again, prions, cooking won't change anything. So if you want to eat brains, you're just going to take the risk. Not a lot of brain risk with, I think, sheep or lamb. I ate monkey brains when I was in Africa, and I didn't tell many people about it, but I texted Joe Rogan. He was like, you're crazy. You're going to get prion disease. And I looked it up, and there's not a whole lot of incidents of that kind of stuff. But I was in Africa with the freaking Hadza, and we killed a baboon.
Yeah, obviously you're going to do whatever they're
going to do it, man. Yeah. Like, I want to have that experience. If I get prion disease, then I lived a good life. And, I start slurring and drooling out of my mouth. And that was the end of Paul, but he lived well, live fast, die young. So yeah. So that was the tangent there. I'll go back and finish the organ hierarchy if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Liver. Then I like heart as the next one. Heart can even be the first organ people eat because it's so much like muscle meat. And if you get a good slice, it's just going to taste a lot like muscle meat, not going to be super gamey. Heart is great for coenzyme Q10, anserine, taurine. Heart is actually a really good source of riboflavin, which is one of these B vitamins that I don't think gets enough attention. People think about folate, but riboflavin is key. And I imagine your audience is savvy because you talk a lot about this stuff on your podcast, but we can get a little geeky here for one moment. There's this polymorphism, the MTHFR polymorphism, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase polymorphism. I have it. There's 677C to T and 1298. I am homozygous for the 677 polymorphism.
Seems like a lot of Italians.
It is a lot of Italians, and I believe Hispanics as well. Yeah. But what you find in the literature is that if you get a slightly the recommended, like if you get slightly above the recommendation for riboflavin every day, if you get 1 or even 1.5 or 2 milligrams of riboflavin every day in your diet, there's some allosteric regulation of that MTHFR enzyme, and you can normalize your homocysteine, which is the reason that you're worried about that MTHFR, by getting good amounts of riboflavin in your diet. But then the question becomes, where do we get riboflavin? Basically, liver and heart are the best sources. A little bit in egg yolks, a little bit in egg whites, but it's pretty rare in the plant kingdom to get bioavailable real riboflavin. So this is another key thing with heart. So
yeah, I forget what the interaction was, but a while ago when I was digging into genetics and all my SNPs and whatnot for the first time, I found, like, I'm homozygous C677T MTHFR. Yeah. So I have like the most impairment of methylation, and obviously genetically, it comes from my mom's side, who's Italian. She has the same thing, and she found that riboflavin supplementation, I believe it was riboflavin, actually like improved her migraine occurrence. Like
absolutely. Yeah. Oh, there's good evidence that like that's really big doses of riboflavin for migraines, like 300 milligrams. But even 3 or 5 milligrams a day of riboflavin just from food could affect homocysteine and MTHFR. But yes, there's something going on with like big doses of riboflavin for migraines.
For the heart, when you say like it's full of like CoQ10, for example, like, do you know how to extrapolate out like, so like, for example, a supplemental CoQ10 soft gel might be like 100 to 200 or something. Like how do you like quantify how much heart is there even a way to when you're eating the heart? You
can look at this is why nutrition is both fascinating and endlessly frustrating. Yeah. You can look at heart muscle and they'll quantify how much CoQ10 is in there, and they'll tell you, but you wonder like, okay, this is in a food matrix. Is it going to be bioavailable and more or less? You hope it is. It's hard to actually do the studies. So I just, when you look at the organs, heart is the highest that I've seen in coenzyme Q10. Yeah. And it's hard to know how bioavailable that is versus a soft gel. When I've done anecdotally in my practicing with myself, when I've looked at my CoQ10 levels in the blood on people who focus on meat and organs, they're high. They're robust. Yeah. They're very robust. They're like maybe 3 to 4 standard deviations above the mean, because they're outside of the reference range above where they, what people expect. They don't see these on normal people, this level of CoQ10.
Right. So like you mentioned bioavailability, and circling back to the raw meat, we will get back to the hierarchy because I definitely do want to go through that. But the cooking thing, some people, like there's some meats, for example, people will assert that the bioavailability of the protein is enhanced when you cook it versus when you have it raw, you're actually losing out. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you'd be thinking with something as nutrient dense as liver, if I can retain even like all of the nutrients and not cook out any of them, if there was a chance that you'd lose some of the quality, like why would I take that risk? Like, is there certain foods that you should cook, like eggs, for example, with, neutralizing the avidin component relative to meats? Is raw like, a more ideal potentially, or like, what do you think on that?
This is such an interesting question now. There's this guy on Instagram doing this raw meat thing, and people are talking about this a lot. One of the reasons that I like to eat raw liver was just this idea, like, okay, I'm going to get all the riboflavin, all the potentially heat labile nutrients. I'm trusting the source. I've never gotten sick in my experience, my N of 1 from raw liver. I'll do an ounce, half an ounce a day, but that's why I do it raw. It's super easy. I don't have to cook it. I like it better, and it's preserving things. I think that the majority of the literature points to the fact that when you cook foods, you will sacrifice some of the nutrients, not all, but some. And when you desiccate nutrients, when you freeze dry nutrients, you're going to lose some of the nutrients, but not all. And the trade-off is what appears to be increased protein digestibility And there's a lot of studies on this. So it's hard to really look at all of them. But I think in terms of like pig guts and these other studies that have been done, Richard Wrangham has talked about this in the book Catching Fire. When you cook meat, it appears that the protein is more bioavailable for humans when you cook it. Now, having said that, I don't really like a well-done steak. So when I'm eating a steak, it's like cooked on the outside and raw on the inside. When I eat hamburgers, they're kind of the same way. So I'm getting both. You could also do the same thing with your liver if you wanted to sear the outside and leave the inside pink. But yeah, there's always this trade-off, nutrient bioavailability, at least in terms of heat labile nutrients. A lot of the B vitamins are probably denatured partially when you cook it. Vitamin C appears to be heat labile. And then protein availability and protein digestibility. You hit on a great thing with the egg whites. I would cook your egg whites because there is avidin. It does bind biotin. You are sort of creating this negative pull away from the B vitamins with the avidin and the egg white. I would cook it if you're going to eat the egg whites. Some people just, for a while, when I was eating more eggs, I would just separate and just eat the yolks because I found them interesting to eat raw and enjoyable and simple. The one thing I'll say about eggs is, from the data that I've seen, if you're getting an organic egg or a pasture-raised egg, if you know the quality, the incidence of the salmonella and the campylobacter on the shell is much lower. And that's where the contamination comes from. So if you crack the egg and there's contamination on the shell, if you keep the yolk membrane intact, the yolk has like a really thin membrane. And you know how you can like crack an egg, separate the white, it'll fall through your hand. The yolk will just sit in your hand. It looks really cool. It's like this little bubble. And it's just, it's not surface tension. There's actually a membrane on the yolk. And if you haven't cracked the yolk with a raw egg, the risk of contamination there is extremely low because the shell didn't even really touch the yolk. So that's one thing to consider. But I would cook your whites if you want to eat them. Does that answer some of your questions?
Yeah. Like I've seen when you actually look at it from like a molecular mass level, it seems like the amount of biotin from the yolk itself relative to the avidin content of the egg white surrounding it, you could otherwise just be like netting out like zero, where it's like you're not, I don't know, where it's like you could be at a net positive, but at the same time, like it seems like the more reasonable approach is just to ensure you've neutralized the avidin component by cooking it adequately.
Yeah, at least for the white. And then you'd have to go through and look how heat labile is biotin in the yolk, how much of the how much of the biotin in the yolk are you going to denature when you cook it. So, and I think a lot of people could also benefit from more biotin, which is one of the kind of overarching ideas. And that's the whole reason that I got interested in nose to tail eating and these hunter-gatherer cultures and eating organs or eggs, egg yolks, or anything in the first place. Like, are there nutrients like biotin or riboflavin or anserine or taurine or CoQ10 that we could really improve our overall nutrient status by sort of eating in a way that is apparently evolutionarily consistent?
What do you think about the like peptides and growth factors that could otherwise be denatured during cooking as well? Like I know Liver King, one of his claims is, well, I don't know how like strongly he believes it or if he just does it as like an insurance policy, but he eats raw because he wants to retain these like growth factors that I'd be skeptical that they're even bioavailable to do something, you know, actively. Whereas like typically that's like a, you know, I don't know, in paracrine function where you have like in intracellular concentrations of hormones being produced, and just like eating it is not necessarily yielding like an active effect. So I would be skeptical that it even does anything, but I wanted to run it by you if you've looked into that at all, or if there's any viability.
It's interesting. Like, so BPC 157 occurs in the stomach and the intestines, or at least in the juices. True. And people do eat like mondongo, I think, is intestines. And then there's like all these other Latin American dishes that are intestines. I have intestines in my fridge in Costa Rica. And people do take BPC 157 orally. And I think it's mostly for gut issues, but who knows? I think the peptides are this Wild West frontier where I would love to see more research on this. And we're just kind of guessing. We don't really know the answer there. You're absolutely right. Like, are they bioavailable? It's a peptide. It's 50 or less amino acids canonically. You're going to put that peptide into a stomach acid, which is less a pH of 1.5. Like, that peptide could get broken down, but it also could have effects in the stomach, or sometimes they do pass through the stomach intact. So who knows? It's very interesting. I remember reading some research about collagen peptides that perhaps, and I'd have to go back and actually dig into this in detail, that some of the peptides might actually pass through the stomach and they didn't get fully degraded. So I do think that's an interesting hypothesis. Like maybe a little bit of raw organs every once in a while could give you some peptides that are valuable. I certainly think that the peptides in organs are fascinating. And I don't know how this research is going to happen, Derek, because I don't know who's going to fund it. But there was a little bit in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There was a guy named Jeffrey Bland who actually did this with rats, I think, and he used spleen extract and liver extract. And there were a couple of peptides in the spleen, tuftsin, splenin, and splenopentin. And he found that when he did desiccated or raw, it did seem to affect the rats. Now, this is a 1970s study that wasn't published in Nature or Cell or Science. So who knows? But there is some of that kind of like murky research from before you or I were born. That's intriguing. And it's never been repeated. The peptides in organ concentrates are kind of they're a black box. Like, could it be helpful for humans? Absolutely. Could it not have any effect on us? Yeah. I think hopefully we'll get some, I hope we get more into that in the future of nutrition.
Yeah. So circling back to the hierarchy. So we had liver at the top, secondarily, perhaps heart. And then below that,
I'll just tell you. So personally, I like testicle.
Okay.
There's interesting things in it, and it could just be all placebo, man. But I feel like there's a libido boost when you eat it. Have you ever had raw testicle?
No, but have you seen, like, you check your biomarkers pretty meticulously. Right. Have you seen a difference in your LH or FSH concentrations before and after? Or?
This trip to Texas, I'm going to get my blood work. And I've been eating raw testicle for like the last year because I can get a lot of it in Costa Rica. They just give me testicles. I can just go to the carniceria and buy 15 testicles. They're like, they don't know who this crazy gringo is who wants 15 testicles. But I'll tell you, I'll let you know after the pod because I'm going to get my blood work done on this trip to Texas. I haven't done my blood work in about a year. It feels good. I'm like, okay, if I feel like I have more libido, that's positive. Who knows? Maybe there's boron in the testicle that's affecting things, but it could be a lot of different things. So I like testicles. People get grossed out by those. What other organs? I mean, brain has a lot of interesting research. There's actually good, solid research on prevention or reversal of like cognitive decline in the elderly with bovine brave derived phosphatidylserine. So that's a pretty powerful thing. And I remember when we were developing our brain supplement, I was looking at a lot of that research and I was like, this is legit. Like they're basically taking desiccated cow brains and giving them to people who have cognitive decline. And there seems to be some benefit. There's a lot of research about phosphatidylserine in general, and we definitely know that it's in the brain. So that's kind of an interesting one. And then you get into things like the intestines, the spleen, the pancreas, the kidneys are valuable. It all kind of starts to blur. And then, who knows which one to choose. I just think it's interesting to eat as much in a variety and kind of see how you feel. And at least from what I've observed with hunter-gatherer cultures, they don't waste anything. Well, that's not true. They will give, they have these hunting dogs and they'll give the stomach sometimes to the dogs, but definitely the intestines. So the intestines go to the dogs. They may clean out the stomach and eat the stomach, but everything else they eat the kidney, they eat the pancreas, they eat the liver, they eat the spleen, they eat the brain, they eat the eyes, they eat everything.
Damn. By the way, as far as blood work goes, Steven told me you were in touch with them for Marek Health. I don't know if you're going to be utilizing them for blood work, but that would be awesome if we were able to collaborate on that.
Yeah, somehow. Absolutely. I'd love to.
Awesome. Killer. I'm looking forward to seeing the results. So as far as like how you got started in all this, like maybe this should have been something I said at the beginning of the podcast, but I kind of just like go off the cuff with what I'm thinking at the time. But as far as like an introduction of how you ended up on YouTube and making podcast content and whatnot, like I don't know how many people know like Carnivore MD, like you're formerly, like you're still like credentialed, like a doctor who then decided to start posting social media content. Could you give like a summary of kind of how you ended up where you are and kind of like a bit of like, people don't know, some people might not know you're a vegan too before, and that kind of the consequences of that on your quality of life led you down this path of becoming, more ancestral based and, head nose to tail carnivore focused, etc. Like, what is that kind of like story?
Yeah. So my dad's a doctor. My mom's a nurse practitioner. I've always been fascinated by medicine. I kind of always thought that I was going to go into medicine. And then I went to college and I got really burned out. And I saw a bunch of doctors who were really fat and unhappy. My dad has sleep apnea. He was obese. He was super unhappy when I was growing up as a doctor. So I got out of college and I was like, fuck that. I'm never going to be a doctor. And I took 6 years off and I just skied. I was a ski bum. I skied, I traveled, I threw hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. I did all kinds of crazy stuff. Nothing productive other than exploration. I worked in bike shops. I waited tables. I remember my grandma would send me like handwritten notes. When are you going to go back to graduate school? I did really well in college. I was just super burned out. And then eventually, like 6 years later, I did get the bug. And I remember the day I was like working in a bike shop, selling a guy a bike. And my boss comes up and he's like, man, you've got a future here. You're really good at selling bikes. And I was like, cool, I'm going to go apply to PA school like right now. So I went to physician assistant school because my dad was a doctor. And I was like, man, I'm not doing that. I don't want that crazy life. So first I went to PA school at George Washington in Washington, DC. I was a physician assistant and I worked in cardiology for 4 years. But basically almost to the day, Derek, like the day I started working as a PA, I was like, oh, this isn't going to work because in PA school, I'm so interested in the pharmaceuticals and just learning about the disease pathologies. I couldn't really see the forest for the trees. But as soon as I started practicing, I realized this doesn't resonate with me. I want to understand what's causing the illness. Yes, it's important to treat it because not everybody's going to make lifestyle change. And sometimes it's acute and we have to take somebody to the cath lab and we need to know what kind of antiplatelet agents to give them in an acute emergency if they're having a heart attack or whatever. But I was like, this isn't interesting to me. I want to know how it works. Like I think in my brain, I'm more of an engineer than a carpenter. So I really was fascinated, like what are the biochemical workings and what is causing this? And throughout my life, I've been interested in nutrition, but never had much education in it. So as I got interested more in nutrition as a PA, I was like, oh, this vegan thing sounds great. It's super simple. We know vegetables are good for us. And I got really seduced by this like raw vegan thing. Cause if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it fully, dude. So for 7 months, I was a raw vegan. I had 2 kale smoothies a day. I remember going to Whole Foods or the equivalent in Flagstaff, Arizona, and buying all this kale. They'd look at me funny. And I was like, you know how healthy I am. Like, I'm so healthy, just stuffing kale in this blender and getting massively bloated. I think I pooped like 3 or 4 times a day and they were massive green. They were massive green things. I was running a lot at the time too. So I probably had a little bit of body dysmorphia and I wanted to be skinny because I looked at these, these East African runners and I was like, man, those guys are fast. I'm going to be skinny. And I didn't really see myself losing weight, but I was like this, like so
you
skinny.
said you lost like 30 pounds of muscle or something.
I was more like 20, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So like that, presumably a lot of that was your running too, trying to, with the body dysmorphia, right? Like I'm assuming while it wouldn't be ideal by your standards, like there must be some way a vegan can maintain or build muscle, obviously, right?
Yes. I think that if you use protein powders, right? If you use protein powders, you can get enough leucine, you can get enough of all the amino acids. You could build muscle on a vegan diet. Is it ideal? That's a whole separate conversation we can talk about. Animal protein has unique things, more bioavailable. And if you eat the full animal meat and organs, you're getting all these other nutrients that come with it, many of which are difficult to find in the plant kingdom. But purely from a muscle building standpoint, there's vegan bodybuilders. We know you can do this.
Yeah.
And like how much of their physique is tons of protein shakes versus gear or other exogenous hormones. Who knows? But it's doable. You don't need animal protein to get that way. I can't talk about their gas or how good they feel or their bloating or their other markers or their nutritional status overall, but it's possible. But as a raw vegan, I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was just doing foods that I could find in the grocery store, like quote unquote whole foods. And it was a lot of kale smoothies, a lot of, soaked almonds. And it didn't work for me. It was pretty bad. I had a lot of gas. The gas is the stuff of legend, man. Like my car smelled. I would go to the movies and, the movies have that big squishy cushion so you can fart in the cushion.
Yeah.
And then you get up and then it all comes out, man.
Oh my God.
You like fart in the couch. And anyway, but yes, there were probably 2 things going on there. My weight at the time was about 140 to 145 pounds. Right now I'm 165 to 170. So when I stopped the vegan diet and I kept running, I added back protein. I probably gained 10 pounds immediately of muscle, probably to 155, mid 150s. And then when I stopped, what I would say stopped ultra running, I was able to gain like another 10 pounds of muscle back. And now I kind of sit in this 165. I'm like 5'9" is my height. So I'm like moderately muscular, but not massively muscular. by any stretch of the imagination.
And when people, I know some people are going to get pushback on like, how could you gain 10 pounds of muscle in like that sort of a time frame? Like presumably you're talking about like lean mass. Like a lot of this is like intracellular fluid and whatnot. That is like you're rehydrating muscles and stuff. It's not like pure 20 pounds contractile tissue added to your frame, right?
Probably. I mean, yeah, I didn't assay any of that at the time. I just remember.
Yeah, it's just some people that get like really into the like the specific verbiage, you know, and they're like, no, you fucking didn't. So,
well, I mean,
just
like,
wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like I was 140, 145, then you add back meat, and I don't remember the exact time frame there, but I remember being like, whoa, I'm 155 now. That's okay. I remember. So I stopped the vegan diet, started eating meat. I remember I went to medical school because at the same time, so there's two stories going on here. I was losing my religion as a PA and thinking, okay, I want to go back to medical school. I want to be a doctor. I want to get my MD. I want to build a practice where I can actually have full autonomy and create some sort of a practice that is root cause focused. So I went back to medical school, having done PA school, being skeptical of the whole medical model. I went to the University of Arizona. I was living in Flagstaff. And the cool thing about U of A is they had the Center for Integrative Medicine there. It didn't actually turn out to be as cool as I thought it was going to be, but anyway, went to medical school. And then all throughout medical school, I'm thinking like, what are the root causes? And I've always been interested in diet and always had this kind of suspicion or bias that diet is a major lever for people for illness. And then the further I went in medicine, the more interested I got in autoimmune disease. And I know we can talk about autoimmune disease and alopecia areata. It's very, very timely these days. But autoimmune disease is fascinating, man. I mean, I've had autoimmune disease, eczema, and asthma. So many people I know have autoimmune disease. My mom has Hashimoto's thyroiditis. She has some sort of, probably some sort of inflammatory condition that's a non-rheumatoid arthritis with some, some autoimmune markers. So it's very common to see this. And I'm thinking, what is causing all this autoimmunity? This is such a fascinating paradigm. And that was where I started really kind of digging in throughout medical school and residency and just being curious and trying to find connections between diet and autoimmunity. And I think that was the genesis of the original sort of questions around plants.
Did you have the asthma and eczema like your whole life and then it was exacerbated by vegan diet, or it was kind of just like all stable and you're just wondering what caused it to begin with because this supposedly healthy vegan diet didn't fix it sort of thing? Or like, how did you come to, and like, how did you even stumble across finding out that red meat is not like autoimmune modulating, like problematic? Because it seems kind of like I get now that people understand the principles of elimination diets and that a lot of people can seemingly handle red meat as like a base level infrastructure without causing any like aberrations in their immune system, like Michaela, Jordan Peterson, you know, people who've popularized it like yourself. But prior to that, when you're learning about it, like where do you even figure this out?
I heard Jordan on Joe's podcast. So if you fast forward to like my residency at the University of Washington, I was eating like a paleo diet. So I was eating meat, I was eating vegetables, I was eating nuts and seeds, and I was eating some quote unquote medicinal mushrooms. I was getting interested in not psychedelic mushrooms when people say quote unquote. So I was doing things like lion's mane, reishi, and chaga. And somebody had a bunch of powders, and I was doing these like these sort of probably hydrolyzed mushroom extract powders. And so I was getting moderate doses of mushrooms, and I had the worst eczema flare of my life. Those are just connected temporally, but I was having eczema flares all through medical school. I was doing a lot of jujitsu in medical school, so I'd get it on my wrists and my elbows, and I couldn't do jujitsu. I was getting infected. I was getting impetigo. Super frustrating. And I was like, what is causing this? I'm eating a very healthy diet, I would say, for most people, like a Paleolithic diet. I have this thing. I was talking to my friend the other day. So I think psychologically, I have something that could either be a pathology, but I've leveraged it for the good, which is that I can get a little obsessive about things and I'm intense. So if I decide like I'm not going to eat a cookie for the rest of my life, I'm not going to eat a cookie for the rest of my life. It doesn't have any, it can't even touch me. Like cookie has no effect on me. Like I'm immune to cookies. That's like a pseudo superpower of mine. It's also makes me kind of rigid and intense and, you know, affects other areas of my life, but can leverage it for the good. And I'm not a complete boring person to be around. I promise. Well, you could ask my friends, who knows, but okay. Yeah. So I've never have to eat a cookie for the rest of my life. And so I'm in medical school. Like I never eat cookies. I never eat processed food. I'm eating raw butter. I'm eating, raw milk kefir. I'm eating salads. I'm eating avocados. I'm eating nuts. And I'm still getting eczema. And I'm thinking, okay, I wasn't really connecting the dots. I'm in medical school. It's stressful. Who knows what's happening? And then residency continued. And I just got super frustrated to the point that I was driving to go surf some horribly mushy, horrible surf break on the coast of Washington on what must have been a cold, rainy day. And I'm listening to Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. And at the end, he starts talking about his autoimmune disease and how doing this diet was fascinating. I thought, that's cool. I've never tried that. My second thought was, that's crazy, because everyone knows that vegetables are good for you and they have all these phytochemicals. And at the time, I was interested in what's broadly called functional medicine. And within the functional medicine paradigm, vegetables are great. Eat the rainbow, eat more vegetables. And everybody knows more vegetables increases the quality of your gut microbiome. And so I was kind of steeped in those ideas. And the original notion that you could just eat meat was, it countered all those. It was very contradictory to what I was, sort of steeped in at the time. But I got curious and I started looking, and I was like, this is interesting when you think about it. It was interesting enough that I started on the experiment, because when I took a moment and I thought about the perspective of plants and animals, it kind of crystallized for me. And this is just this idea that nothing on earth wants to get eaten, but an animal can run away from you, kick you, or bite you. And so they don't seem to have defense chemicals in their muscles. I mean, occasionally like pufferfish tetrodotoxin or, this poisonous frog in the Amazon, but 99.8% of animals and mammals and little reptiles are edible. But plants are completely different. They're stuck in the ground. So 450, 500 million years of coevolution between animals and plants have had to develop defense chemicals, many of which are quite beneficial within medicine today, some of which we use as medications or chemotherapies. But there's a lot of chemicals in plants. They're like these chemical factories. And there's been this warfare between plants and animals for generations, millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And some people hypothesize that the CYP systems, the CYP450 systems in the liver, are this evolutionary adaptation to plant toxins as we're evolving. Like, how do we, we're going to detoxify these plant compounds. We have to hydrolyze them. We have to glucuronidate them. We have to oxidize them. We have to get rid of toxins in our body. So it makes sense. Like, maybe plants are containing toxins that are problematic for humans. And then the overarching sort of broader hypothesis would be, what if some people are more sensitive to these plant toxins, and that could be a trigger for autoimmune disease? And that's sort of where it all begins. And then down the rabbit hole you go.
Do you know who inspired Michaela and Jordan to do their initial carnivore diet stuff? Because they, presumably this started somewhere, and who was the pioneer of this shit?
I think it might have been Sean Baker, an orthopedic physician who has been doing it a while. I mean, I don't think anybody knows. There's also this guy there's called the Bear, who was a roadman for the Grateful Dead. He wrote a book about this meat-only diet. What's his name? Aldous Stanley, maybe. So yeah, it's been around for a while. And I think it all sort of percolated out in the last 5 to 6 years.
Now, the people who were kind of at the forefront of popularizing it prior to you had Jordan, Michaela, Sean Baker, etc. Are they still on the kind of muscle meat only train, or have they since kind of adopted nose to tail principles? Because it seems like she follows this lion diet, which is from what I understand, just steak all day. And obviously you don't think that's optimal, but I mean, where have you seen those developments? Kind of have they evolved in their thinking, or do a lot of them still follow that same, I don't know, muscle meat only hypothesis?
They're pretty staunch supporters of the muscle meat hypothesis. So I interviewed Michaela. I had her on my podcast. I've talked to her a couple of times in the last few years. And what she has said, at least a few years ago when I talked to her, is when she gets a craving for liver, she'll eat it. But I don't think she gets a craving for liver that often. And then I think Jordan eats liver occasionally, but I don't think he eats it that often.
They tolerate it though and don't get an immune response, right?
No, I don't think they have a problem with liver. They just don't. Okay. They don't feel compelled to eat it regularly, and they certainly don't seek out other organs. I've never seen Sean Baker eat organs, and I think Sean, and this is just, I'll speak for him, but if I'm misquoting him, then I apologize, or misrepresenting his perspective. I think he believes that talking to people about just eating meat is the easiest way to teach the idea, or to share the idea. If you just tell somebody your 15-second elevator pitch, hey man, just eat meat, just eat meat and eggs. That's all you need to do. Then that will help. Right. That makes it the easiest thing for them. Whereas when I started looking at this, I was like, I think humans need a few more things than what's in meat, and these organs could be beneficial, and they're eaten by these indigenous tribes. They're never wasted. Like, let's dig into it further. So that was kind of my interest, was distilling it a little more and thinking about more of the details, which complicates it and makes it more difficult for people. But it was just kind of my academic exercise. Like, if this is really going to be viable, which we can talk about my ending journey, like it ended up not being viable for me, pure animal foods ended up not being viable for me. And it's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. And it sort of triggered a lot of interesting thoughts and curiosities about the plant foods.
Yeah, so this is actually like I followed your content from way back when you first started, and for me, like I'm sort of like the steroid hormone guy on the internet, and the only thing I noticed that I was like critical of, and I had made I think a video a few years ago about it, is you would constantly show your blood work, and I would consistently see this like female level SHBG, and I was like, I would see you try and like rationalize it at the time. And then I would see other carnivore guys who were inspired by what you were doing, try and justify their like nuked free testosterone levels and be like, oh, it's just like, I have higher sensitivity to it. It's just like the androgen receptors don't need that much. And I'm just like, there's got to be like something fucking off here. And then eventually you started incorporating honey and fruits. And now everything's kind of like normalized and, optimized, presumably. So like for you, like, I don't know if your book also had like the principles of no carbs in it, but was that like a really hard thing to walk back from, because you were pretty gung-ho on it for a while? And like, yeah. I commend you for being not like the zealots who are like, nope, fuck it, keto only, like this is what you got to do. Like, you walked that back and, said you were wrong and this is what you think now. And I thought that was great. So I was just wondering like what that process was like.
I took some heat, man. I took some heat. Yeah. Probably rightly so. I mean, but this is what it's about for me. Like, This is the way it should be. Like, we're learning. I'm not going to get everything right. I've always said that. Like, who says I'm going to get everything right? Maybe I got something right. Maybe I didn't get anything right. But it's just interesting to think about it and ask the questions. And the problem with the Carnivore Code, so my book, the first book I wrote was called The Carnivore Code, is books are not a living document. They're such an anachronism, I think. Like, you create this book and then it's out there in print and people are like, oh, I read your book. And I'm like, that's great. Chapter 6, 7, and 8 have revisions in my mind that you may not know about, because I definitely evolved, changed my mind a lot about fructose, which is a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. And I think something that is still very relevant today, because there's a lot of people who conflate studies looking at fructose in isolation and fructose in whole foods, which is crazy to think about and really interesting sort of nutritional reductionism and the dangers of that. But yeah, I changed my view on zero carb. I changed my view on carbohydrates in general. And the labs show it. Like, I think my last SHBG was close to 50. The total went up, the free went up. And yeah, I was trying to understand this in the process, because you're sort of like an astronaut. You're like a pirate, man. You're sailing on seas that not many people have been down. Nobody's done keto that much. And you're like, oh shit. I mean, I'm doing this ketogenic diet, which, people say is good. And there's Dom D'Agostino being like, oh yeah, histone deacetylase inhibitors and ketones are great. And you're like, well, these super smart guys are saying this is good. Yeah. And then I'm talking to David Sinclair and he's talking about the sirtuins. And I'm like, look, like ketones activate sirtuins. Like, there's a longevity effect to ketones, right? And then you're like, but my SHBG is 120. Like, what the, what the fuck? Like, why is this happening? I'm like, well, I can still get an erection, thank God. But like, well, I don't know. Maybe it's, and then, just again, I'm not going to throw Sean under the bus, but you look at Sean's labs and he's only shown them once. And his total was like in the 200s for his testosterone. So it's very low. And he was like, oh, androgen receptor density. And I'm like, well, he's a pretty big, strong looking guy who looks pretty good for mid 50s, to tell you the truth. So I don't know of a way to really quantify androgen receptor density, but I'll tell you that I feel better overall with carbohydrates in my diet. So that was interesting. And what I learned was, this is, you learn this the hard way, but it's really good. Like, you go to the nutritional literature, you can find stuff to support both sides on almost everything. You can find stuff to support keto, you can find stuff to support carbohydrates. And so it's nuanced, and it's kind of fun to think like, how do we navigate this? Like, is it good for people to eat carbohydrates? Is it bad for people to eat carbohydrates? I had massively improved sleep, body. I would say the composition improved. I felt like my muscles were fuller, less muscle cramping, less heart palpitations when I incorporated carbohydrates back. But yeah, that was difficult. So the detractors then are like, this guy wrote this book about zero carb. And if you read the book carefully, it's totally dogmatic about zero carb. And now he's adding honey and fruit. I think somebody was like, I hope you guys got your money back. And I was like, well, I still think it's a valuable book.
I think in general, now, like, this is something I deal with too, is because I've been publishing content for, I don't know, 5 years at this point, approximately, maybe more. And stuff I said in the first couple of years, like I genuinely don't have time to go like re-edit articles I've wrote over half a decade ago. So it's like, I just would compel people to follow whatever the most recent content is of your content creator you're trying to educate yourself from, because oftentimes they will learn something that totally goes in the face of something they said like 3 years ago or something. And it's kind of, I think that's admirable that people are like going out of their way to further educate themselves, even if they're seen as like an expert authority in a space. Because you could easily just claim like, I already know everything, this is the way you're supposed to do it, and then just like dig your heels in the ground and say like nothing I'm doing is wrong, even if your blood work shows otherwise, or you in your head you think you could optimize some other way, but it doesn't align with what you've said in the past. So in general, like some of the stuff I said 5 years ago is like totally moronic compared to what I would think now, or at least I perceive it to be. So I would just, explain, or I don't know, compel people to like really follow the recent stuff and stay on top of recent stuff if you're going to be, drafting your own, I don't know, hypothesis about something. Just things evolve over time. And even like the experts in the space are constantly learning and educating themselves.
I couldn't agree more, man. I think it's fun to have that mental freedom and to be seen now as, I'm sure that people who are in the classic carnivore space don't like me anymore. And I'm like, that's great. Like, I don't want to be seen as dogmatic. I'd rather admit like, hey, I'm evolving, I'm learning. Yeah. I was a little wrong on this. And then, I think you eventually then collaborate with people who are also open to that sort of learning. And then you're like, oh, I can trust this guy more, because if he finds something, he's going to say like, hey, I was wrong about this, then maybe you can say like, but I actually think that this thing that I also thought, I still see evidence that is correct. So maybe that stuff is even more valuable. Who knows? But ultimately, it's just about sharing stuff that is valuable to people and helps them improve their quality of life, which is a fun thing to do.
So like you mentioned how your sleep improved from adding the carbohydrates in, and, myriad of other things. So like in general, something I've always wondered, and I've like considered keto. Now, like, obviously I wouldn't do it chronically, but I've considered like cyclical keto more so for the cognitive like flexibility and kind of like, I don't know, sharpness you get from it, which, seems to be unmatched in terms of ability to just like dial in and be super sharp on something. For you, like, do you think that mental sharpness is almost like a fight or flight state being perpetually sustained, where like you're getting almost no serotonergic activity from the lack of carbohydrate ingestion? You're also just like in a perpetual like elevated sympathetic drive because you have like, I don't know, no sugar? Or like, how do you think the mechanism is for, like, is it a healthy process thing to be in where you're like really sharp because of keto, or is it like a byproduct of a suboptimal state potentially?
I think it's more the latter. And I mean, I've had debates on this when I've been on both sides of the issue, but if you look at it, I think acutely in people who are in ketogenic diets, cortisol will rise, sympathetic nervous system goes up, and then the body seems to like kind of calm down and say like, oh, we're not getting any carbohydrates in the near future. And they do kind of normalize, but it just makes sense evolutionarily that if you can't find carbohydrates, your body's going to say, get up at 3 a.m. and go find some freaking stuff, man. Go dig a tuber, go get some fruit somewhere. Like, I think it's absolutely, like you said, a manifestation of a heightened fight or flight sympathetic response rather than a good thing. And you do find people have improvements in brain fog, this colloquial term, when they make improvements in their diet with elimination diet. So that I think is cool. And so you can improve your cognition with, maybe phosphatidylserine will do it. I think nutrients in organs and meat will do it. A lot of things will do it. And good sleep will do it, right? So you can get good cognition without being fully keto. But yeah, you do get kind of locked in. And I think it's a result of the body pushing the accelerator real hard to make you go pick some fruit off a tree, find a hive somewhere, hunt an animal, get a little more fat. Because the fascinating thing about human physiology is we die without carbohydrates or fat. We die. We know this. This is protein, this is rabbit starvation. This is protein excess, protein toxicity. So if you're not finding carbohydrates, your body's thinking, whoa, if we lose fat right now, like you're dead, dude. So you better either go find some fat or find some carbohydrates, or we're not making a baby, or you're not making it the next generation. So and I personally, just subjectively, don't really feel like my cognition is that much different off keto than it was on keto. But maybe people will look at my old stuff and be like, oh, he was way sharper when he was on keto. I don't know. I feel fine. And I like sleeping, and I like not having muscle cramps or palpitations.
So do you think the mental sharpness more so comes from a stability and blood glucose control more so than the actual, like, I'm assuming there is some sympathetic involvement with, driving you to go get glucose because you feel your brain is like, holy shit, like there's literally nothing coming in. So for you though, when you started introducing honey and fruit and whatnot, and you mentioned you didn't really notice a big difference in, mental clarity and whatnot. Do you think that's a result of your glucose control and insulin sensitivity more so than anything?
I think so. And you can see this on things like continuous glucose monitors, which I do a lot. When you eat a meal of fruit and honey, you will spike your glucose, but the area under that glucose curve is going to be really low. It's a very quick response because, man, insulin sensitivity is super fascinating to me. We're going to talk about metformin today too. So hopefully we can talk about this, but I love insulin sensitivity and like the roots of the metabolic dysfunction, all this stuff. It's really, really interesting. But I do think that there's a lot of evidence in my blood work and continuous glucose monitors that I'm extremely insulin sensitive. I mean, my fasting insulin is super low. The baseline insulin is really low. The excursions are very small. The average excursions are very small. I get a spike when I eat. And I don't really worry about that. I worry much less about the absolute level to which my glucose goes postprandially, and much more about the postprandial area under the curve, because that's more reflective of like the actual insulin utilization, since we don't have a continuous insulin monitor right now, that we could check. But yeah.
Do you do anything to kind of like optimize that nutrient partitioning process, like, walking after each meal or anything of that nature? Or do you have like ideal control even when you're just eating a big meal and chilling at your desk?
It doesn't really have a major difference, but I think that humans we might know this intuitively. It feels better when you eat a big meal to move around a little bit. So I kind of feel that way because sometimes I get really hungry and I'll eat a pound of meat, a few ounces of organs. We have amazing fruit in Costa Rica. I'll have some raw milk and I'm like, wow, all right, I'm pretty full. So I'm going to move around a little bit. I might go do some pull-ups or just walk around the yard or move. And it kind of feels intuitive for humans. I don't do it every day. I'm not trying to like push my body to dispose of the glucose. And this is tangentially related. I'm not a fan of things like metformin or berberine to blunt that glucose response for a variety of reasons. But yeah, I think it generally happens pretty normally. Just like baseline, your default is to dispose of that stuff when you're super insulin sensitive.
Okay. Before we talk about metformin, the combination of fruit and meat, like I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, you're combining fat and protein with sugar equals like inflammation, plaque buildup, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the common conception is protein and fat or protein and carb, but don't combine like the three at the same time. If you're metabolically healthy, presumably, is that something that's not even a consideration? You just eat like whatever you need to hit your micro and macronutrient needs for the day from high quality food, and it doesn't matter what ratios they are together and like separating them throughout the day or anything, in your opinion?
I don't worry about that at all. I've never seen any good literature to suggest it's a real problem. People will sometimes mechanistically point to like, oh, the Randall cycle. And I'm like, yeah, look at like, I'm so fat. Like, look at me getting super fat on fruit and honey and meat and fat. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just my anecdote of N01, but I don't see it as a problem. And I've never seen anybody do an RCT or anything problematic that shows like, oh, if you eat honey with meat, then you're going to really spike your insulin. You're going to become more insulin resistant. And I mean, the labs show it. Like you can look at the CGM, you can look at the fasting insulin. It's so low. and like with really no concerns about that.
And one of the biggest components of like the Western diet that you vilify is like seed oils, and you think it's responsible for a lot of the issues that come with, metabolic dysfunction nowadays and whatnot. In like a eucaloric model or even like a calorie deficit, do you still see the like linoleic acid density of foods doing the same things, or is it in the context of somebody who's like eating in a surplus in general where you see these issues crop up in conjunction with the linoleic acid content?
Yeah, linoleic acid is super fascinating. So, I mean, didn't the guy do the Twinkie experiment where he like lost weight and improved his insulin sensitivity eating Twinkies in a caloric deficit? So I think we know that in humans, if you have a caloric deficit, you can eat freaking whatever you want. Like you could eat probably pure sugar and pure seed oils in a caloric deficit and see your insulin sensitivity improve. Long term, I don't think that's very sustainable for humans. And I do worry, or would hypothesize, that when you return to a normal caloric diet, that your satiety is going to be off. Obviously, your nutrient adequacy is going to be low. And I think that long term, you are probably putting yourself in a pretty disadvantageous position from a satiety perspective in your brain. And I worry that's the kind of thing that's hard to quantify in a short-term study. So somebody does a calorie restricted Twinkie diet, and then they come back and they've pumped, a bunch of processed sugar and seed oils into their adipocytes and cell membranes throughout the body. Do they then have some altered satiety later that's going to make it hard to maintain a good body weight or a healthy body composition? That's what I would worry about. But I do think most of what we see with linoleic acid is normal caloric or hypercaloric, because one of the potential problems with linoleic acid is that it affects satiety and causes people to overeat. That's a very interesting thing. There are these cannabinoids. 2-AG is one of them. It's been studied in animal models predominantly, but we do see things in humans that suggest that that's an important thing. Also, like rimonabant is a very effective weight loss drug, and it works on this cannabinoid system. It also makes people suicidal, but it actually can affect satiety in a positive way, meaning increasing satiety by giving people rimonabant. It's an incredibly effective weight loss drug, but it turns out blocking the CB1 receptor, I believe is what it is. I don't know if it has much activity at the CB2 receptor, is great for satiety because these cannabinoids, whether endogenous or exogenous, affect satiety negatively. They make you more hungry. People know this from weed, the munchies, but it also is effective for proper mood, and people get suicidal and depressed when you give them rimonabant. So, yeah, it's not a good thing. But I think that so calorie restricted diets it's not sustainable for any human. Like that's a prison. Yeah. Nobody wants to live that way for the rest of their life. And what's most interesting for me from a weight loss perspective is how to let people eat to satiety and also achieve a good body composition. That's the holy grail. Like nobody's suffering. Nobody's like, I don't want to eat that. I want to eat that, but I can't eat that because I'm going to get fat. It's like, can we get people to a position? And I think we can, that's just my guess, where they can eat basically to satiety of a select group of high quality foods and still achieve a good body composition. That's living to me. That's a higher quality of life.
Do you know what your daily calorie intake and macros are by chance? Like, I'm assuming you don't track that meticulously, but do you have like a ballpark idea? Because like you're pretty lean. You're like, I don't know, 10% body fat or something and exercise regularly and, or a healthy individual and exercise enough to make use of those calories. Like where that lies ballpark?
Yeah. So I don't track it religiously. I would say 200 to 225 grams of protein per day. That's pretty consistent because I'm getting some protein from cheese and dairy. And I also have 2 pounds of meat and some organs, maybe even 240 grams of protein per day. I think with all the honey and fruit I'm eating, I'm probably 200 to 250 grams of carbohydrates a day. And then the fat is probably the hardest one to estimate. If you think about cheese, and when I do ground beef, it's 20% ground beef. When I do steaks, they have ribeyes. I would say I'm close to 200 grams of fat a day, if not maybe a little more. So those are my ballpark macros. I think that's pretty reasonable. And if you do the math, I think it's like 3,200 calories a day or more.
How many grams of carbs again?
2 to 250.
Okay, so we're at like 8. I have like 3560 on a calculator here.
Yeah.
3,560.
Yeah,
so
I wouldn't doubt it.
240 grams protein, would be 960 calories. And then you have the 200 carbs, which would be 800 calories. And then, so that's 1760. And then you said the 200 fat, was it?
Probably 150, 200 fat. Yeah.
9 plus, yeah, 3,560. So staying that lean with that much intake, like it's pretty fucking good.
I don't doubt it, man. I mean, I think that's probably where I'm at. And to be fair, so when I'm in Costa Rica, I'm surfing 2 hours every morning. I love it. That's why I'm there. And then I'll come home and I don't do anything crazy. I don't do chronic cardio. I don't have a stair stepper. I don't run. I will lift weights, but it's not crazy. It's really not anything out of the ordinary, which is probably why, like I have moderate muscle, but not massive muscle. So I'll do front squats a few days a week, maybe once or twice a week. I'll do, a few sets of front squats. I'll do pull-ups every day, 2 or 3 sets. I'll do some dips just because I like it between working. And then, some days I'll do a few Nordic curls, and some days I'll go to the skate park and skate. That's going to burn some calories, but I'm not in the gym 2 hours a day after I surf by any stretch of the imagination. It actually, it surprises me sometimes. And it's like, okay, like I think I do have a healthy metabolism. And I wonder, this is that age old question around where does most of our caloric burning come from? Like how much of it is from basal metabolic rate? Presumably I have a pretty good basal metabolic rate. Obviously muscle is going to burn calories. And I've never really thought that the idea that you could lose weight by exercising was going to be sustainable for humans anyway. Because I think if you're burning enough calories with your exercise, are you going to affect your thyroid negatively or cortisol? Like I definitely think building lean muscle mass by some sort of resistance exercise is critical for humans. Mm-hmm. But I've never really been attracted to the notion that you need to do an hour of cardio a day, or the way to get really lean is by doing cardio every day. Because I don't. Some people would say, oh, you surf every day. And it's like, yeah, but sometimes I get 3 waves in 2 hours and I don't do anything out there.
Damn. Do you like listen to music out there? Or you just chill with the sound of the water? Or
you can't listen to music in the ocean, dude.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been surfing, so
yeah. Oh, you got to go. No, you just chill out there. You see friends, you see stingrays jump in, you hear whales sometimes, you watch birds, you look at the sky, you think about life. It's good. And every once in a while you get a wave and you're like, that was the coolest 5 seconds of my life.
Nice. So like your typical day, you wake up and you surf every day for 2 hours? And
I love it.
So, okay. So like your cognitively sharp hours, like most people, when their cortisol spikes and they wake up, they have like, I don't know, like a good, like 6 to 8 hours in the tank. And then after that, it kind of like mental clarity, brain fog sets in a little bit, adenosine levels are increasing. You start to get just like not as capable of producing high quality work. Like, do you have like an allocated block for when you do your most intensive stuff? And like, where does that lie on your like day? Like, what's your sort of like daily routine?
Yeah. So I really think that for me, I'm lucky if I get 2 productivity blocks a day. And I think of these productivity blocks as 2 or 3 hours of like deep work. Mm-hmm. And so I will create that between maybe like 11 and 1 p.m. and then maybe take an hour to look at the ocean or move around a little bit, or 45 minutes, and then try and do another one before 4 or 5 p.m. And by that time I'm done. And at that point in Costa Rica, because I'm near the equator, the sun is always setting at the same time of the day. It's sunset. It's time to just chill out, watch the sun, look at the horizon and be relaxed. And that's pretty much how I do it. I'm lucky if I get 2 good solid work like blocks a day.
You must have a really good, diverse team working for you then, because there's no way you'd be able to run a company with, I feel like, working that like 2 to 3 hours, like twice a day. Like you've got to be pretty fucking dialed in on those hours.
Oh, like I said, my role now at Heart and Soil is like mission and like the overall vision and like the science behind it. But I've totally hired this team to do all the business stuff on the back end. Like,
do you do product dev still and like oversee and kind of like green light stuff before it goes out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. And we're sort of at the point with Heart and Soil where we're like, hey, look, I think some companies try to create product. We're kind of like thinking about it. We're like, man, we've got products that cover a lot of things. We're more interested in just helping spread the message to more people rather than just creating tons and tons of new products. We've got an exciting new product coming out soon with the collaboration with George St. Pierre, but that's
nice.
That's the new one. It's just exciting because I think a lot of people in George's audience aren't aware of the value of organs. And so cool,
Yeah.
like millions more people are going to hear about this and hopefully benefit, or at least thousands.
No, it was like a really interesting, I don't know, collaboration when I saw you guys just like randomly on Instagram together. I was like, oh shit, like George is on the train now too.
He loves it, man. He loves it. And
Yeah.
he talked about it. I mean, he posted a photo of his body composition after doing an animal-based diet for a month, and he looked ripped. And George is like the nicest human ever. But George is more balanced in his brain than I am. He can do the strict thing for a month and then go to a restaurant and eat tiramisu. And I can't do that. So
yeah,
kudos to him. But it kind of he's good. He's more like, I think that's how more people are in their life. They go to the restaurant, they get tempted, they want to eat the dessert. Great. But I go to the restaurant, I'm like, nope, don't eat dessert ever.
so if you had something now like a tiramisu, because you haven't ate stuff like that in so long, would your microbiome just be like, what the fuck, and just like send you into like an immune frenzy?
It could. I probably wouldn't feel very good. I probably wouldn't sleep very good. I might get a mood swing and be a little cranky. Like I would feel it, man.
Yeah.
I would feel it. And for me, that psychological penalty is not worth it. Like I really like performing well, whether it's in jujitsu and medical school or surfing or whatever I'm doing, like creative work. I want a clear brain. It's just, I don't drink alcohol for the same reason. I don't find it to be useful to me. I think if people want to drink alcohol, that's your choice, but I don't find it to be useful. Like I don't need it to relax, and I don't like the way that it impairs me the next day. Like I really like being in the ocean. I like being in nature. I want to do good creative work, which is the majority of what I do. So that's the trade-off for me. I'm always thinking like, is this worth it? And the answer is usually no.
So in terms of like your sleep, like you mentioned, impairing your sleep and whatnot, do you have, and your wind down time, or you just like watch the sunset and stuff like that? Do you have like a pretty regimented time you go to sleep and amount of hours you get in before you wake up? Like what's your sleep hygiene kind of look like?
Yeah, I've found that as I get older, I'm 44 years old. So as I get older, I'm much more sensitive to this. And if I have a consistent sleep time and a consistent wake time, I just feel so much better. So every once in a while in Costa Rica or wherever I am, I'm going to go out with friends because I want to see them, and I'll be out an hour, 2, 3 past my bedtime. And inevitably that compresses the sleep window, or it's very jarring for me. And it's like, it's worth it. Like, you know, sometimes in Costa Rica, friends come to visit and I want to be social with them, and I'm up late. But usually, I mean, people will laugh at this. Usually I go to sleep at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and I'm up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And then I'm in the ocean by 6 a.m. So that's the normal schedule. So I get a lot of time in bed. I'm definitely protecting 8, 9+ hours a night for sleep.
So something that's kind of interesting about you versus like Liver King, I get the sense that you're willing to incorporate like technology and like wearables, like a Dexcom and like things of this nature to optimize and kind of like biohack, even though it's not necessarily like ancestrally consistent to wear like a Dexcom, obviously. So that sort of thing. Do you do things around your sleep too with like, I don't know, blue light blocking glasses, blackout blinds, wearables that track your deep and REM, stuff like that?
I do blue blocking glasses. People will laugh. If you come to my house at night, it's all red lights. It looks like a lizard cage. Just lights calming. You know, there's conflicting research on whether that's really important, but I like the red lights at night. I definitely have blackout curtains, and I have found for me that the sleep temperature and the temperature in the bed is important. So I've used like various cooling pads.
Which one do you find to be the best? Because I've had, I don't know who to believe too, because a lot of people who talk about it, they're like an affiliate or like a sponsored person. So I don't know if like Chili Pad's the best or like the 8, whatever. Like there's a bunch of different companies, and
I've had multiple Chili Pads. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I've had multiple Chili Pads, and they almost always break. So I have 2 Oolers right now. They're both broken. And I need to call Chili Pad and get a new pad from that, like cracked and leaks all over the floor. So those broke. I had an 8 Sleep that eventually broke. And then one of my friends was like, oh, you got to try this thing called a bed jet, which like literally blows air between your sheets. And I haven't tried it. I just put it on my bed yesterday. I just got back to Austin, Texas right now. And I was like, I don't even know if I can sleep with this thing because it's like inflating the sheets around me. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. But I haven't figured it out, man. Like I like the chili pad when it works.
Yeah.
It's not quite powerful enough for Costa Rica, although it's pretty good. I mean, I have air conditioning in my house in Costa Rica. I prefer to have like open air, but I
Yeah.
can't do
What's
it.
the degree in your bedroom? Do you manually manipulate it to, like, I don't know what the equivalent is to, I sleep in 18 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. Like, is there a
20,
number?
20 degrees Celsius is because I have like the air conditioning units I have in Costa Rica are in Celsius, and I'm usually around
Yeah.
20. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what
Yeah.
like the optimal temperature is, or is it just like based on whatever optimizes your metrics the best?
Yeah. Well, some people would say what, 68, 67, who knows?
What is that in Celsius?
Oh man, I'd have to look it up. We'd have to do the conversion. I don't know. Probably 18, 18 or 19.
68 Fahrenheit to Celsius is
18 Celsius
20.
is pretty cold. Oh yeah.
Maybe I'm doing it too cold. I don't know. It definitely is a little bit harder to get out of bed though too when it's like really fucking cold. You're like, no, I'll stay under here.
But I do think some cooling in the bedroom helps. For a while there, I wasn't using air conditioning in Costa Rica, and I had the chili pad going, and that was a little hard. Like the chili pad was just chugging along, it's working so hard to cool the bed. But
yeah, one of the issues I've sort of run into as far as like the intermittent fasting thing and having your food, too close to bed, there's like the intermittent fasting window affords mental flexibility where you're like cognitively sharp. For me, anytime now, I know obviously your glucose control is going to play into how sharp you stay postprandial and like how tightly you can control that, spike and then subsequent drop. But there's also the idea that you don't want your body temperature to go up too much and eat too close to bed and be digesting while you're trying to sleep, because that screws up your sleep too. So do you have like an eating window allocated to where you're not like potentially impeding your mental sharpness in the morning, but then also not screwing up the getting to sleep part on the tail end?
yeah, so I actually looked into this. It's quite fascinating. For a while there, I was trying to keep a strict 8-hour window. And there's some research. I mean, it's only a few studies, and I've only looked at a few small studies, but I think there was at least one study where they took diabetics and they put them on a 6-hour eating window. And it was only a 4-day study, and they didn't look at testosterone, but they did see improved metrics of autophagy. Actually, the mTOR went up in the evening, which was fascinating because everybody thinks mTOR is going to go down, but intermittent fasting can actually increase mTOR. And mTOR gets vilified so much by certain types in the nutrition community that kind of grinds my gears a little bit. But then there was a longer study. I think it was a month or two, and it was 8-hour eating window, and the testosterone actually went down with an 8-hour eating window. So, and that's a strict 8-hour eating window. Like first bite to last bite is 8 hours, which is pretty hard for most people. So when I saw that stuff, I was like, you know what? I'm going to push my window out. 10 hours seems to be pretty good for me. Like I can pretty easily take my first bite to my last bite at 10, but not every day. Some days I'm an 11-hour eating window and I just don't stress it that much. But so I eat in the morning before I surf. I don't worry about eating to impair my mental clarity. I don't worry about that at all. I get up, and before I surf at like 6 a.m., I'm going to have a papaya, half a papaya, a couple bananas, maybe some goat's milk kefir, and then I'm going to go surf. And then I'm going to come back, eat a big breakfast at 10 in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. And that's a pound of meat, a few ounces of organs, fruit, honey, raw dairy. That's what I do for my breakfast, lunch. And then I'll do dinner early in the evening. 3 or 4 p.m. is ideal for me. But if I eat it at 5, I don't stress it. So I'm not really strict on my eating window, crazy, but I'm going to go to sleep early. Like I'm grandpa going to sleep at 9 p.m. So I don't want to eat too late, because if I eat past 6, I'm going to probably affect my sleep negatively. I definitely want 3 hours between 2 to 3, at least, before when I eat to when I finish, go to sleep.
Do you track your metrics with anything like an Oura ring or anything of that nature?
No, it's usually the type of thing like I get so in my head that I'll wear the Oura ring, and if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm like, oh, I'm fucking up my sleep score. God damn.
Oh, it'll like ruin your sleep by trying to like beat your score, sort of thing.
Yeah. When I had the 8 sleep bed, that one actually does it without wearing anything. So that's kind of cool. It does it kind of like secretly. It'll check your HRV and stuff, but I can usually feel it in the morning. Like, you wake up and some days you're like, man, I didn't sleep that good last night. Or you're like, oh, I feel good. Like that to me is as good as any Oura ring. And I'm like, oh, I'm fine.
How cognizant are you of like EMF and Wi-Fi and stuff like that? Like I know Liver King, he uses Ethernet for everything. And I don't know how much he plays this stuff up as a gimmick versus like he actually believes it.
He believes it, dude. I've been to his house.
Okay. He's like off camera, this stuff is like what he's doing.
Yes, dude. It is so legit. And he's a really good human. He's a great human. He's a really nice guy. But he's intense. Like when I go to Liver King's house, like the cell phone is off in the house.
Yeah.
I can't even turn my cell phone on. It would be disrespectful because they ask you when you come in the door, please turn your cell phone off. It's on airplane mode if it's in the house. If you want to use your cell phone, go outside of the house. I'm not that intense. I do wonder about EMF, you know, like I've got to wonder how much this stuff affects us as humans. I'm curious. I haven't really been able to fully form my ideas around this yet. I don't sleep with the router in my genitals, like on my genitals. I don't sleep with the router on my head. And honestly, just because I feel like it's an easy thing to do, if I'm in Texas or Costa Rica, when I go to sleep, I'll turn the router off. I don't need to have Wi-Fi in my house when I'm sleeping. Who knows if it actually makes a lick of difference? I don't have a lot of Wi-Fi routers around my house in Costa Rica. There's a lot more here in Texas, but I'll turn the Google Fiber off when I go to sleep. And that's about where I leave it, man. I mean, I've got my cell phone, right here behind my computer that's irradiating me right now. And I'm in a house and I'm talking to you on Wi-Fi right now. So
your balls are getting destroyed, bro.
I know, right? So, I mean, who knows? It's an interesting thing. There's like so many rabbit holes to go down. That's not the one that I've chosen to like fully dive into, but it could be interesting. I remember hearing some research that if you wear your cell phone on your belt, that can decrease sperm counts and testosterone. So it's like, all right, if my phone is in my pocket, it's on airplane mode. I think there's like different levels, and the first or level or two are so easy that I'll do that all the time.
Yeah. What about his, like, does he sleep on the floor or what's his like bed?
He does, dude. He did a video about his bedroom, and that's actually how his bedroom looks. Like they actually have these really great mattresses. They're made of wool. And they're just very simple mattresses, and it's like all organic. I really like when I go to Liver King's house and I'll crash and hang out because we like to wake surf and stuff. Like I sleep amazing there for what it's worth. Like they have these super simple wool mattresses that are basically on crates on the floor.
So is there pillows too, or is it just like your head's just laying there?
No, I think he uses pillows. I haven't been in his bed, but I think he uses pillows. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, because I could see like some people arguing that some mattresses are impeding your spine's like curvature and like, not complementary and whatnot. And like sometimes I wonder myself, because like when you're sitting on a computer, you inevitably end up getting like a bit of a shitty posture sometimes.
Oh, I know. I hate it.
And then I just wonder, am I exacerbating it when I'm sleeping as well? I don't really know.
I don't know. I sleep on my stomach, which people say is horrible, or my side. But generally, I'm like a stomach side sleeper. So I'm cranking my neck to the side, and like hyper extending my back. And then I have to get up and do deep squats to probably fix it. Who knows? But yeah, what I will tell you is that whatever, like I've never seen, I think I can safely say I've never seen Brian post about something that he doesn't do. Like he legitimately, so he's done a couple of posts for dramatic effect where he like runs the Ethernet cable like out into his backyard a few thousand feet. So like, I think that's people know that's like a caricature. Yeah, and I think he did a post where he's like in Central Park working with this freaking Ethernet cable coming from the hotel. Like, like that's probably dramatic effect, but like legitimately everything in his house is on Ethernet. There's no cell phones in the house. And the man, like he freaking worked his ass off with his workout. So he's a good dude.
So how did you meet him? And like, I don't know if it's like publicly known that you guys are like collaborative on like the business stuff, right? So like, how'd you meet him and get into business with him in the first place?
I think he heard me on a podcast. I remember when I was first starting out talking about carnivore, I went on like Ben Greenfield's podcast. And I think he heard that one. He reached out to me and he was like, man, I love what you're doing. Let's chat. And it was close to the time of Paleo FX. So this was way before he was doing social media. For the longest time, he did not want to do social media at all. And he showed up at Paleo FX, and we had this great dinner with the whole crew of like his original supplement company. And it was just so cool. Like such good people who were interested in like asking questions, and really good people. I really enjoyed him. And then we became friends. And I think that I do really like these ancestral principles. I think that Brian is a little more intense about it than I am, but I really appreciate thinking this way. I think there's a lot of benefit that can be gained by thinking about, well, how are we programmed to live, eat, move as humans? And can we mirror that more today to make us more happy? I think that's a very useful construct. It can quickly become, a little bit intense for people, but I think it's a useful construct to at least think about. And I definitely use that as a nutritional construct when I'm thinking about the evolutionary consistency of certain things in the diet. And it helps you, or helps me, sort of ask questions and look for research that might be contrary to what the mainstream is suggesting with red meat, organs, LDL cholesterol, all these type of rabbit holes to go down. So we met, we became friends. We just enjoyed hanging out, man. We enjoyed hanging out, working out. We see the world the same way. We have a lot of the same values. Really good human to work with. And, at some point in my journey, I did a podcast with him and we talked about this openly. I was starting to get offers. People were like, you should make an organ supplement company. And I thought, yeah, it's very aligned for me in terms of my values. I would love to do that. And at the time, Brian and I were friends. He had another company, and I'd called him and I was like, hey, man, I'm getting these offers to do these other companies. I just want to let you know as a friend, and it's going to be a competitor. And he was like, well, let me think about this. Maybe we could do something together. And I was like, that sounds great. I would say that Brian is like one of these people that I would go to war with. I've never been in the military, but like he's one of these people you would trust with like your children, like if you die, like he would, I don't have children, but like it's one of these people that you just believe is a good human through and through. And so that's the kind of people that I would be comfortable going into business with. I've never been a businessman. I'm a doctor, I went to medical school. We don't get shit for business training. I didn't know much about it. Yeah. I didn't know anything about COGS or MOQs or any of this stuff. And so what a good person to go into business with who understands the space. And it was great because basically everything that we created at Heart and Soil was my philosophies, my creative stuff. And Brian was there to support from the business end with like the ideas and like of how to run it, like the structure and like, how do you get on Amazon? That's a pain in the ass, How do you build a Shopify store? But that's what's fun is that like, Brian has his thing that's like all of his ideas. And I got to have a company where it's like, like, let's build a company with organ capsules that actually incorporates like a dietary philosophy, like animal-based. And if people pay close attention, an animal-based diet, which is a term that I've tried to communicate to people as like a summary, is different than the way that he eats, So like I'm not a huge fan of things like almonds, but he's eating almonds. So even between us, there are some differences in the way that we look at our nutritional philosophies, but it was cool to be able to design a business around sort of my ideas and think like, oh yeah, maybe let's construct it like this because of this. And then we did things a little differently. And ultimately, I think that there's like 99% of the world still doesn't eat enough nutrients from organs. So like, where's the competition? We just want more people to benefit if possible, and then improve their diet and live a higher quality life.
Yeah. So like I think he did a podcast recently with you and then also Thomas DeLauer. And he mentioned how the Hadza, when he went to visit with them and, live their lifestyle and whatnot, is they were using vegetables for medicinal purposes, was like their actual claimed purpose of them. So is that something that like in general, I know you're not like totally against the notion of using, supplements or like phytochemicals, like where warranted, but you just assert that you could probably gain the majority of the benefits from lifestyle, like hormetic stressors and whatnot. But like when you have the Hadza themselves saying there's like medicinal benefits to vegetables, like where do you see that kind of like intersect? Like how do you go from they're problematic and they're good to like, how do you even know how to incorporate it when you're following this like carnivore based diet model?
Yeah, this is a super important point that I've tried to communicate to people, but it's interesting. And it's been an evolution too. So I definitely think that plants, and we mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the podcast, plants contain chemicals that have physiologic actions in humans. This is not debatable. What I want to try and communicate to people is this question. When you are looking at a plant compound, let's consider the benefits and the risks. I think a lot of these plant compounds, because they're often sold as supplements, we really just focus on the benefits. And a lot of the studies or research that looks at potential side effects is ignored. Metformin is a great example. And metformin is in some ways a derivative of a plant compound. It's from a French lilac, and metformin itself doesn't occur in the French lilac, but compounds that are used to synthesize metformin do. And berberine is similar, although it's a different molecule from a bark. So a lot of these compounds do occur in plants and can have physiologic effects in humans, but I think it's interesting to look at them and say, okay, should you eat this every day as a food? Is this a food or is it a medicine? Because if you're going to take a plant compound to affect a physiologic reaction in your body, then that's great. But understand that that's going to have a side effect. Like every other pharmaceutical, you're going to get at a pharmacy, whether it's metoprolol, rosuvastatin, simvastatin, or omeprazole, right? Because within medicine, we always know these drugs have side effects. There's no perfect drug that goes in and only does one thing. Statins, for instance, they don't just affect, HMG-CoA reductase. They do all sorts of things. I mean, there's all sorts. HMG-CoA reductase is such an important part of the mevalonate pathway that it affects so many things in the human body. But, there's so many molecules like this, which have all these disparate effects in the human body. And we have to understand that. So plant compounds, and this is kind of the beginning, was one of the things I thought about at the beginning of this carnivore diet. Like, I think we've got plant compounds a little bit, we've given them too much free reign. We've given a lot of free hall passes to the plant compounds and said, oh, look, turmeric does this. There's like 1 or 2 studies of people with OA, osteoarthritis pain, with turmeric. That's a freaking great molecule. And I'm like, wait. There's a lot of studies with turmeric that suggest that it's not great. I mean, I asked Andrew Huberman to send me the study, but he didn't send it to me. I was talking to him the other night. He was in Costa Rica, and he was like, yeah, there's some studies that show that turmeric decreases testosterone. I was like, that's fascinating because it
interacts with AR more so than actually inhibiting steroidogenesis from what I've seen. So it's like a mild anti-androgen.
So that's interesting, right? Yeah. And so then we're deepening our understanding of molecules like turmeric, which affects potassium channels. And apparently it looks like it can affect P53 and affect thyroid reductase. And so then we have to look at turmeric, for instance, as a model and say, okay, these are the benefits. These are the side effects. We've mostly forgotten about the plant side effects for us. And then these plant compounds get pushed to the forefront because people are like, oh, you get these people with like polypharmacy of supplements and they're taking sulforaphane and turmeric and, broccoli seed extract, and they're taking, astaxanthin and a million freaking molecules. And nobody's saying like, oh, astaxanthin actually inhibits 5-alpha reductase too, from what I understand. And like, maybe you don't want to combine all these things. And do you really know that you need all those things? Do they make you better? And then as I got deeper down the rabbit hole, I was like, humans can actually do a lot without these plant compounds if we can establish a good foundation of health. And then how do we do that for us? So that was kind of what I was calling into question, like, where is the relative value of these? And with every compound, like, let's have an honest assessment of harms, risks, and net benefit. And then if we're claiming there's a net benefit, let's try and substantiate the fact that net benefit is something that's not redundant or that is actually beneficial for a human. A lot of these are very lofty questions, and it's challenging to say sulforaphane, as a net benefit, and it's going to give you more glutathione than you could get by doing other things. But that, I think, should be the goal, because there's potential downsides of sulforaphane and other molecules like it.
Have you ever had Rhonda Patrick reply to you?
Never once, man.
Oh, damn. I would love to see that. I think
it would be great. Like, I'm super respectful. I've always tried to be respectful of Rhonda. I would love to debate David Sinclair or Rhonda and just have a conversation about it and say, like, okay, these are the things you're saying are the benefits. Like, maybe there's studies I'm not aware of. Like, let's talk about it and understand. Like, for instance, with sulforaphane, like, the benefits of sulforaphane appear to be on the NRF2 system. It increases glutathione, which prevents DNA damage. But are we sure that DNA damage is something that we're going to have if we don't have sulforaphane in our diet, right? So that's the question, because there's a lot of ways that you can trigger your NRF2 system. And there's other studies on the other side that suggest that, generally antioxidants don't prevent DNA damage for humans, and that the endogenous mechanisms, glutathione, superoxide reductase, yada, 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 are pretty good if you're a healthy human. Now, are you a smoker? Are you exposed to tons of heavy metals? There's all sorts of baseline metabolic health and overall sort of, let's call oxidative reductive balance, inflammatory states for humans. But I'm curious and at least biased to believe that humans can achieve a lot without these plant compounds. And then we might circumvent some of the bad side effects. And then the question, really interesting question, is like, what do these plant compounds do in us long-term? Which is a really fascinating rabbit hole to go down. I recently got on this one, again, talking to Andrew Huberman about non-protein amino acids, which are these amino acids that occur in nature that don't occur in the human body or don't get utilized in the translation of proteins in the human body. And their hypothesis, I believe the gentleman's name is Rubenstein. I believe he was at Stanford, but he's dead now, but he was very interested in the hypothesis that these non-protein amino acids, predominantly from plant foods, predominantly from seeds and beans, could accumulate in the human body and cause misfolding of proteins. Well, that's an interesting hypothesis. Like, if that's contributing to neurodegeneration, we'd want to know that, and they occur in things like beets and alfalfa sprouts. And then maybe they're in seeds that we don't even know about. So it kind of goes back to that original sort of the first principles. And the way I frame this now is like, look, plant leaves, plant stems, plant roots, plant seeds, they don't want to get eaten. They're going to have defense chemicals. Let's be cautious and careful and understand if they're harming us, or at least ask the question, because let's go back to the original thing. We don't fully understand autoimmunity in humans. And is it possible that these could be contributing to autoimmunity in some people? Yeah. And then you see it happening, at least anecdotally, with stories from the carnivore diet or diets that are elimination type diets. Doesn't even have to be carnivore. It could be autoimmune, paleo, animal based, which is organs, meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? That was kind of rambling.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah. The one thing I would say, or was wondering if you would concede, is that like some individuals don't necessarily have the time to go sauna, cold plunge, do these things that are environmental hormetic stressors that might achieve the same outcome without the side effect profile necessarily. And they may otherwise like have a time constrained day where they have family, they have a 9 to 5 and this and that. And maybe one of these plant molecules achieves some hormetic stress that is comparable or potentially even, supersedes what you might get from some level of environmental stressor that otherwise is just impossible to fit into your day. Like contextually, do you think there's some situations where there's a viability, or at least acutely, if one day you're like crunched for time, you don't have 30 minutes to go, sit in the sauna, jump into a cold plunge, like do this and that? Do you see like viability in that?
Absolutely. And I think that the conversation is still relevant around them, because then it's like, okay, if you're using the sulforaphane for that, just make sure that you're getting good sources of iodine and check your thyroid and, kind of know what the downsides were, like you would with any other stressor, right? Like resveratrol, for instance. Interesting data with resveratrol depleting androgen precursors. Like, okay, maybe that's not a good one to take long term, and you wouldn't want that in your diet. Or understand, and there's other people who are also huge fans of NAD or NMN and NR. Well, NMN and NR are going to deplete your methyl groups, so that's actually problematic. Looping back to the MTHFR thing that we talked about. Yeah. If you really believe that you can have longevity benefits, and the whole NAD thing, I think, is a fascinating conversation. I'll just comment on it briefly. I think that there's something there, but if you really believe that there's substantial evidence that NR, nicotinamide riboside, or nicotinamide mononucleotide are going to give you longevity benefits, then by all means take them, but understand that like you probably want to check your B vitamin status and understand your methylation status and your homocysteine. You might want to take methylfolate. You might want to take betaine, which is trimethylglycine, because they're going to deplete those things. And if you get anxious or have psychiatric effects from taking NR, don't ignore it, because you're probably affecting your neurotransmitters. I'll just say this briefly about the NAD, the NAD thing, that with NAD, I think the most interesting thing is that enzyme NAMPT, and that when people are insulin resistant, NAMPT doesn't work as well, because NAMPT is the main way that humans regenerate NAD in the human body. And so I've done a couple of podcasts about this on my podcast, which is called Fundamental Health. I think, again, we're back to metabolic health and insulin resistance as the primary good things, or the reverse of those being the primary drivers of chronic illness, even NAD depletion as we age, because that enzyme NAMPT won't regenerate the NAD. That's just an aside. Throw it in. Sorry to.
No worries. Yeah, I think it's definitely prudent, because like we do talk about like biohacking and like supplementation a lot on my channel and whatnot. And I think a lot of people would, like when Sinclair talks about his regimen, some people might blindly assume what he's doing is optimal because he's the leading anti-aging researcher and he's at Harvard and all these credentials that you're like, oh my God, like obviously what he does is the best thing ever. On metformin, he does this, he does that. Automatically equates to I should probably do the same thing without like digging into it further, not seeing genetic predispositions, like the thing you mentioned with like the methylation cycle itself and having to, deplete methyl groups and having to assess your choline intake status. You might have to supplement with betaine, not getting enough creatine in. Like all these things are like tangent things that you also have to understand when you do this one other thing too, that it's pretty comprehensive trying to learn it all, and it's almost overwhelming to a point that I don't know, makes you wonder.
That's why I think like that's where the sort of ancestral evolutionary paradigm is so fascinating to me. Like, what if humans can be really pretty freaking good if we take care of our circadian rhythm, get some real sunlight, eat foods that are evolutionarily consistent. We can debate what those are or not. And, and then try and avoid toxins and then do things that you care about and try not to get super stressed and, like have a meaningful life and a community that supports you. Like that's pretty simple. And I love the simplicity of that ancestral message. It's like, hey, like, you don't need to take NR, NMN, just be insulin sensitive. And that to me is why that's such a focus of what I do, because I see that over and over and over in the work, that insulin resistance, AKA metabolic dysfunction, is at the center of so many chronic illnesses that it's understanding how to correct that is so critical. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but we can go wherever you want from here.
So you did a podcast with David Sinclair on your channel, right?
Before? Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Okay, so it was a while ago now. Because I would be curious if anyone's grilled him on the metformin study that just came out, or like in general, did you talk to him about his metformin use? Because I know even before the study, you weren't like gung-ho on it to begin with. So like your initial kind of like perspective of the drug, if it has viability in any context, would be, just interesting for me to know, personal interest. And then above and beyond that, this new data that came out that suggests it's like heavily implicated in the birth defects in males.
Yeah. So hypospadias. Yeah. We could put a link, or I can screen share. I pulled some stuff up, but yeah. So I wasn't a fan of metformin previously, and
I'll enable the screen share.
I'll contextualize this. So metformin is a great example, like we talked about. Yes, here's a molecule somewhat derived from plants. Again, there is a derivative of metformin in French, lilacs, okay, which is essentially a toxin. Like this is a plant defense chemical.
Screen share should be on now.
Okay, cool. The mechanism, I'll say this and then I'll pull up the study that we were talking about with hypospadias. So the mechanism of metformin is super interesting. So people think that it's a complex 1 inhibitor, but it doesn't inhibit complex 1 at physiologic concentrations. It actually does this. It's like really deep biochemistry. I did a podcast with Petra Dobromilsky from Hyperlipid talking about this on my show because I got really into biochemistry. So it's glycerophosphate dehydrogenase, which is a part of it's after glycolysis that regenerates NADH in the early steps of glycolysis. Like that's what metformin appears to inhibit. And that's part of the mechanism. Functionally, what that means is that the good thing about metformin is it shuts down inappropriate gluconeogenesis at the level of the liver in people who are insulin resistant. A lot of people think that diabetes is like you eat too much sugar, your blood sugar goes high. That's not how it works at all. You eat too much sugar, and then your body is actually making sugar. Hyperglycemia and diabetes is inappropriate gluconeogenesis by the liver, which is the formation of glucose de novo because the liver is insulin resistant. So insulin, all the studies I've seen suggest insulin is not necessarily anabolic, it's anti-catabolic. So it stops the flow of like free fatty acids, it stops catabolism.
So do you think that downstream, a lot of insulinogenic cascades that lead to growth factor production are kind of very like pro-proliferative? Like for example, GH downstream insulin presence is kind of like critical for the IGF-1, for example, and some of these growth factors that are, very, very, I don't know, like satellite cell proliferative, which could then lead to increased myonuclear donation, which you could then hypothetically hypertrophy those donated myonuclei if you were a bodybuilder. So that's where the idea of using like high carbohydrate intakes while staying as lean as possible, ideally and insulin sensitive. And then the implementation of like things to keep you insulin sensitive while you crush a shit ton of carbs, while using like exogenous GH with the presence of those carbs drives up IGF levels to like crazy amounts. And you get like the most hyperplasia and hypertrophy possible. So like those kind of cascades, like those don't seem to be like anti-catabolic. They seem to be like the most anabolic and like potentially like cancer driving as well. Like in that kind of vein, do you still see it as like an anti-catabolic hormone?
Well, I mean, I think just if we're talking about insulin action specifically,
like inherently what it does itself.
Yeah. But like downstream, there's a lot of potentially anabolic things.
Okay,
cool. But there's good studies that show that it's like anti-catabolic and not necessarily anabolic per se. But yeah, I mean, it certainly is part of these like downstream anabolic cascades. But
Okay.
there's so many interesting things in that, in what you were just saying. But anyway, yeah, this idea that insulin could be involved, and that if the liver becomes insulin resistant, and we can talk about what I think is driving insulin resistance, it looks to be broken fat cells and this sort of like impaired adipogenesis. Like I think insulin resistance, most people would agree that insulin resistance, aka metabolic dysfunction, is starting in the fat cells. And then we can talk about why, like what is causing the fat cells to get broken. But broken fat cells appear to be the root cause of metabolic dysfunction. But one of the downstream effects of that at the level of the liver is, well, the liver isn't responding to insulin, and you get this gluconeogenesis going out of control. And that's why you get hyperglycemia in diabetes, et cetera, pre-diabetes. But metformin blocks that, and it probably blocks it by glycerophosphate dehydrogenase, which is really fascinating biochemistry and the regeneration of NADH in glycolysis. But what we know is that when you're in medical school, you learn, okay, you can't give metformin to somebody if their creatinine is more than 1.4 because they'll get lactic acidosis. That's not a good thing. And then recently, more and more stuff has come out about metformin and B12 deficiency. So what's going on there? It doesn't appear to be related to intrinsic factor, but metformin can lead to B12, which is kind of an important B vitamin if you want to make DNA and neurons and not have horrible anemia and like potentially irreversible, neurologic damage. That's important. So we have to give diabetics B12 and watch their B12 with metformin. So it has these bad side effects, right? In some people who will not make lifestyle change, metformin is a life-saving drug, and the side effects are worth the risks. But this is medicine. And in medicine, we are pretty good at saying, okay, watch out for lactic acidosis, watch out for B12. And we've also known, I think the first study,
the changes in the microbiome as a result of metformin? Do you think that's just like a consequence of what it's doing interaction wise, and that's ultimately what a downstream outcome is, but that's not like a primary reason why it's like effective?
It's so hard. I mean, the microbiome is such a black box, man.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Like, what was that big lawsuit where that lady claimed to make this like magic black box, and you could put your blood in and it would show you all this stuff?
Theranos or whatever.
Theranos, yeah. Like, dude, the microbiome is such a black box. Sorry. It's such a black box. When people say like, oh, this changes the microbiome and it's good or bad, I'm like, I have no idea what that means for the microbiome. I can tell like your microbiome changes, right? Yeah. But is it good? Is it bad? Who knows, dude? And there's so many different nodes and connections and niches for different organisms in the microbiome. It's crazy. So I don't think we understand the microbiome well enough to clearly say like, yes, no, like these are good microbiome changes, bad microbiome changes in general. And so that's a tough thing. But I mean, look at this study. If we're talking about testosterone. So this is 2021, February 3rd. But I mean, this is one small study, 70 individuals, metformin dropping testosterone in individuals with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes. So that's interesting.
Do you hold basic attention token?
What is that?
It's the cryptocurrency that is run through the Brave browser. I was just wondering because I saw the symbol on your top right section.
No, I just have I'm just using a Brave browser.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that. I just noticed.
So what they did in this study was they normalized their glycemia with insulin for 5 days. So they say 70 men, they gave them insulin pump therapy for 5 days to achieve glucose normalization. And then they were randomized to either control, which is insulin only, or metformin for 1 month. And testosterone was measured at baseline randomization 1 month after treatment. And you can see here that when you normalize the testosterone, when you normalize the glycemia, testosterone goes up. But then you give them metformin and it like kind of drops the testosterone significantly in all of the measures with metformin. So the reason it went up is because you normalize the glycemia with insulin. So nobody's done a study where they just give metformin to see what the net effect on the testosterone is. But this is interesting. Is there some sort of an endocrine disruptive effect to this molecule? Again, what are the side effects of this molecule? There's definitely a benefit to metformin, but we can't, this is I think the philosophical error that so many people make. We can't just assume that a drug is all good, that a plant molecule is all good. What's going on here? And now this is the Science article talking about the study in the Annals of Internal Medicine. I can't get past the paywall to see the study, but I read
Neither
the
could
ad.
I tried though.
I know.
Tried.
Sci-Hub failed me.
Yes,
So you read this article and basically they summarize it. There's significantly increased rates of hypospadias, which is where the urethra goes to the bottom of the penis rather than out the end of the penis in men taking metformin. And they controlled for a lot of different things. It's an observational study. It's not an RCT, but they controlled for a lot of different parts of this, saying like, okay, could it have been something else? Could it have been their diabetes? Could have been another drug they're taking? And no, it really looks like metformin is associated. Correlation is not causation, but it's pretty significant. Now, the absolute risk reduction or the absolute risk increase in this is pretty low, but metformin is 86 million people prescriptions. So they say here, it's only affecting the males who are taking metformin while the sperm was being made. I found online 64 days for full spermatogonia production. They say 90 days before conception. So you can imagine, like, if somebody took the metformin not 90 days before conception, it's okay. But if you're making sperm that's a little bit disrupted because this is some sort of a hormonal disruptor, they're saying significantly increased odds of genital defects, which is a big deal.
This is one of those things I've always wondered about as individuals who are using pharmaceuticals and like epigenetic changes you could pass on to your children. And if it would be like prudent and almost responsible to be coming off of all pharmaceuticals in like the time frame where you have like full sperm production, maturation, development, and impregnation, and then making sure your wife is, doing the proper things as well. Because like even for me, like I use a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor for hair loss, but I'm aware of the fact that 5-alpha reductase inhibition in like a prepubescent child can lead to like a literal like micropenis. I'm not saying that there's any evidence to suggest that it's going to pass on to my kid, but like I'm fucking worried about it. So like, I don't know, like coming off of all medications, I guess it's not a viable strategy for a lot of people that have a necessity clinically, but then it kind of like reveals the underlying need for them to probably just fix all their natural stuff to even be in a position to potentially come off the medications to begin with.
I mean, I think do the simple things first. Do your diet, nutrient-rich diet, toxin-free diet as much as possible. That's why I'm a fan of organs. Get organs however you can. Optimize everything. But I think it's reasonable, especially for males, 90 days before you want to conceive. Like, think about your supplements, think about medications you're on, definitely if it's metformin. And let's just be clear here. Like, diabetes is very treatable. It's fixable without medications. Like, we know that this is not controversial. Like, if we could find a way to incept these people and say, hey, you're going to wake up and be like, I want to make lifestyle changes. I'm going to get walking. I'm going to get in the sun. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to stop eating junk food and get rid of Coca-Cola. If you believe what I believe, they get rid of seed oils. If you believe what I believe, they could eat more red meat, more organs, more nutrient-rich foods. We're going to fix diabetes. Like, this is fixable. And we're giving people meds and not necessarily within mainstream Western medicine saying like, hey, this is a fixable disease. Do you want to take meds or do you want to do lifestyle? Somebody says, hey, I want to take meds. Great. But that's one of the things I hope to be able to affect in my lifetime is the paradigm that we use.
Now, I know this isn't going to be applicable for the majority of people, but like extreme outliers with genetic predispositions like type 1 diabetes or familial hypercholesterolemia, and these individuals who are put on certain medications to manage things that their genetics have essentially, or I don't know, some autoimmune thing that happened when they were like a fucking baby, or like however this stuff manifests itself. Those kind of people are kind of like need to be on medications to prevent certain things from happening. So like when they're about to have a kid, is there like some sort of, I don't know, like what do they need to be mindful of? Do you think they just gotta like bite the bullet and stay on their stuff? Like, I know that's maybe not a question you need to answer, but I don't know. It's just like an interesting paradigm.
Everyone is so individual, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, a type 1 diabetic is not going to be on metformin. They're going to be on insulin. They're a completely different thing. So
they don't get like enhanced glucose control with metformin above and beyond. It's like where they can lower their insulin dose though. It's
pretty rare. I mean, I haven't, worked with a lot of diabetics. Maybe they're incorporating it, but type 1 diabetics, at least in the beginning, are not insulin resistant. Mm-hmm. So that's the mechanism of metformin. They're not getting inappropriate gluconeogenesis. They're not secreting any insulin because the pancreas is attacked by, here we are back to autoimmune disease. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this, which is quite interesting. There are case studies. These are small case studies of young kids doing dietary interventions, specifically a carnivore diet. There's a group in Hungary that's a pretty intense group and pretty strict, but they've published case reports of reversing type 1 diabetes in a 9-year-old kid and I think a 10-year-old kid when they caught it early and they did this elimination diet. Granted, many people would see a carnivore diet as pretty intense, but it argues like, is there an autoimmune component to some cases of type 1 diabetes that could be affected positively by changing diet? This is why it's important to ask these questions.
I would speculate probably. That's just my, layman's perspective, but like I would think things like, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, if you get in front of it before it's like totally destroyed, like you can obviously retain function. But if you just let it disintegrate itself through like autoimmune attack over years and years, like eventually the organ can only withstand so much like damage to a point that it's like non-functional, presumably. So if you're a type 1 diet or going to be a type 1 diabetic, like it's at least one of my friends who's a type 1 diabetic. It didn't happen. He didn't notice it until he was like in his teens. So like presumably when you're a kid, like actually, I don't know, maybe that's wrong. I would have to revisit the situation to actually ask him the context, but presumably this is like a progressive thing that's happening. Something internally is like, I don't know, attacking your pancreas, presumably.
Your immune system.
Yeah. And then at some point I don't know, destroy enough beta cells that you no longer have any function. But if you got in front of it, then maybe you could have prevented it to happening in the first place.
Seems reasonable, right? And then the question becomes, what is triggering the autoimmunity? That's why I got interested in carnivore, right? And so the hypothesis, which many people would disagree with, but I think is fascinating, that I've kind of been captivated by for the past few years is, are some of these plant chemicals triggering autoimmunity in some people? Who knows? But we asked the question, and we were talking before the podcast about what happened at the Oscars. Chris Rock made what I thought was a pretty off-color joke about Jada Pinkett Smith, and she has alopecia areata, and Will Smith goes up and smacks him, whatever. But because I thought we were going to talk about this, alopecia areata is autoimmune hair loss. For what it's worth, so I found on Reddit there was a guy on Reddit who used a carnivore diet to heal his alopecia areata. So super fascinating.
So for me, like I would say one of the premier channels on androgenic alopecia. And from what I've seen, like I'm not an expert on autoimmune caused hair loss. I'm more like androgen induced miniaturization of hair follicles, but like the autoimmune component and having like localized patchy loss. And like these are, I don't think a lot of people realize like these are organs, like hair follicles. So they're prone to the same autoimmune attacks that like your other organ systems are. And this is what you see the manifestation of in times of like very high stress. Also, individuals end up with localized loss, but then also presumably diet and like some sort of autoimmune reaction or leaky gut or like something that is causing like, foreign invaders to be detected and like attacked by your immune system. And until you rectify that, it presumably just like continues happening and you just like think you're screwed genetically, but in reality, it's like potentially just something you're eating.
The mainstream medical paradigm is you are screwed genetically. And that makes me.
And then they slam you with corticosteroids.
Yes. Right. They'll inject corticosteroids in your scalp. I mean, Jada Pinkett Smith was like, I was getting steroid injections in my scalp, which is going to thin the hair and the face. And this guy, I'll show you his photos. It's pretty cool. We can put the link in the show notes or whatever for this, but he was getting like patchy things on his beard and he's injecting his face, which can cause, long-term permanent skin changes. But this is what I kind of rebel against with my work is this medical paradigm that these things are not treatable. And I don't think I've got all the answers. I don't have a panacea. I just think we should be asking the questions and trying to understand, are there really simple solutions to these autoimmune things? Could we create a diet if we believe that an animal-based diet, obviously, which is what I'm a fan of, is safe and effective? Like, let's recommend that. If you want to recommend a vegan diet, try that. If you think meat is the autoimmune cause, try a vegan diet, like autoimmune paleo, whatever, some sort of intentional elimination diet, I think could be a very powerful adjunct for these autoimmune conditions. It could save people. I've talked to countless people now, Derek, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. These are all N of 1, right? Or N of 5, but Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, Sjogren's, eczema, psoriasis, right? Like you name the autoimmune disease, we've seen it effective positively by intentional dietary changes. My community is people generally cutting out plant foods.
Yeah, like for Jada, presumably, like whatever she's doing to date led to it happening. So it's like whatever her current lifestyle is equals her getting alopecia areata. So like obviously something needs to change, and it's not just like I definitely am. I think anyone who understands the mechanism can understand how like flawed it is to see somebody have an autoimmune attack and then think, how do we band-aid it by suppressing your immune system rather than finding out like why is your immune system like fucked up to begin with? You know, like that would be like I'd be worried, like, why is my immune system attacking organs? Like that's terrifying.
That was the reason. That was exactly what happened for me with my eczema. And I would get bumps, man. I get itchy bumps. People would say, oh, that's vanity. Well, I don't want itchy
Yeah.
bumps because if my immune system is attacking my epidermis, what is it? What is triggering it? Something is pissing off my immune system. And people with autoimmune disease tend to get multiple autoimmune diseases. We know this. And these overlap. So like, I don't want my immune system pissed off in general. Can't my body be more calm? I'm probably going to lead a better life if I can understand what my body wants and doesn't want.
In general, is there a way you could explain in like layman's terms, like what leaky gut is and like why somebody might have an autoimmune reaction to like plant compounds or even like gluten or this or that? And then another person might tolerate it just fine and not have like, I don't know, the same gut permeability leading to like leakage and causing autoimmune issues. Like what is sort of going on at a base level that people can like wrap their heads around?
Yeah. So in the gut, there's like a single layer of endothelial cells, the gut epithelium, and they're connected by a number of proteins that are junctional proteins. There's tight junctions. There's this protein called zonulin. And so people need to understand that you're basically a donut. You put food in one end of the donut, it goes out the other end of the donut, right? You're a complex donut with a lot of twists and turns, but you have a big donut hole in the middle of you. And the middle of that donut is the difference between the outside world and the inside world. And that's separated by a single cell layer, the epithelium of the gut. And on the inside world, inside of your body from the gut, is the majority of your immune system. People think it's in lymph nodes or your spleen, but there's lamina propria is a layer of your gut wall that houses the majority of your immune system cells. And so there is like this demilitarized zone. This is like North South Korea, man. You know, there's like inside the body, outside the body with this diplomatic layer between them. And if that diplomatic layer opens, then undigested food proteins, the hypothesis that undigested food proteins can pass in and piss off the immune system. There's a bunch of highly trained Green Berets, snipers, and Navy SEALs on the other side of your gut lining, and they're just waiting for some bad guy to come across the fence and go, blah, right? And so then they get pissed off and go other places in the body. So I've heard Alessio Fasano, he's a pediatric gastroenterologist at Harvard, one of the guys who's mainly popularized the notion of gluten hypersensitivity, even beyond celiac disease, talk about the fact that you can look at certain markers on immune cells and understand where they originated. And so in multiple sclerosis, you can find immune cells in the brain attacking the glial cells that wrap around the neurons that have originated in the gut or have markers that look like they're from the gut. Same thing in type 1 diabetes. You can find immune cells in the pancreas attacking the beta cells that look like they've originated in the gut. So, okay, that's really fascinating. That's this sort of gut-mediated hypothesis of autoimmunity. Then the question becomes, what's pissing off the immune cells in the gut? Many people have different answers. Some people would say dysbiosis, whatever. Glyphosate, gluten, I think is a pretty big trigger for people because it is a lectin. I would say let's ask if plant compounds could be doing this because many plant compounds do have these lectins. This is a carbohydrate binding protein. They occur in all foods, but it appears that many of the lectins present in plant foods are more irritating to the gut. And the way this happens is you get some particle in the gut that looks like a bacteria. And then you get zonulin, which is this protein in the gut wall, being released. And it's a signal to all these gap junctions in the gut to open so the immune cells can come in and they get all pissed off and then proteins can pass across. So leaky gut is when something triggers your gut to open those gap junctions. Immune cells go one way, proteins potentially go the other way, and you get this sort of mixing and the immune system can get overactivated. That's at least the overarching hypothesis. And the question is, are there food molecules that look like bacteria? Because evolutionarily, we would have wanted this to happen if a pathogen, a parasite or a pathogenic bacteria, Salmonella campylobacter, get in the gut. We know that when we get gastroenteritis, if you did eat a raw egg that had chicken shit on it and you got campylobacter, or you ate some raw meat and got campylobacter, you're going to get leaky gut. right? If you eat a food and you get food poisoning, you better believe you have leaky gut. And so that's exactly what we want to happen evolutionarily, for our immune system to sometimes touch the gut, because sometimes we get bad things in there. But is it possible that food molecules have epitopes, regions of these molecules that resemble bacterial pathogen associated molecular patterns or damage associated molecular patterns, PAMPs and DAMPs, and that sort of triggers the leakiness of the gut and then initiating the immune response? I think it's a very compelling hypothesis, but wouldn't you know it, like mainstream Western medicine doesn't seem to give a shit about the gut when it comes to autoimmune disease. We balkanize this, man. We have a gastroenterologist and then we have a rheumatologist. Wait, what? Like, you have one guy that treats autoimmune disease and you have one guy that treats the gut. Shouldn't you like talk to each other? But no, everybody's like, oh no, that's me, that's you. So it's pretty scary stuff. It's interesting.
No, even like endocrinologists, I don't want to like demonize like specialists or anything, but it's just like shocking how many specialists don't like stay up to date on literature or have like any open-minded, like, I guess they're dealing with patients all day. So, maybe the last thing they want to do is, sit down and read new studies and shit or test hypotheses. But like, oftentimes I'm shocked that even some of the patients coming into Marek Health and they've seen like an endocrinologist specialist who overlooks something like super basic. Like, we've diagnosed pituitary adenomas from individuals who were just told like, you're depressed or you this or that. And it's just baffling. Like, some of the stuff, even on like blatant, like biomarker, like aberrations, that it's like, oh, you should probably look into this and like see what's going on. That just gets overlooked entirely. I don't know.
Yeah. Somebody's got a low testosterone and their prolactin is off the charts. Maybe you should look for a pituitary adenoma.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of like, you would know better than I, like what kind of, process there is in terms of trying to learn all the different areas of medicine and like how much like, education is done in each like vector of the human body. But it seems like there's, even in like the specialists, some of the education is like interestingly either outdated or doesn't encourage like further education or something.
It's a problem, man. I'll say this. I really think that most of the research is funded by pharmaceuticals. So most of what we're taught in medical school is procedural and pharmaceutical based. There's almost no nutritional discussion, no matter what specialty you go into, which is why I think it's tragic. Like, nobody learns about nutrition. Nobody learns about obesity. Never in medical school did I learn about broken adipocytes that hypertrophy instead of hyperplasia for insulin resistance. Like, this is all postgraduate, post-residency, personal learning that anyone can do, right? Because you don't even have to be a doctor. Like, you can read PubMed as well as I can. There's tons of people in the space who have no doctoral degrees, case in point, who are brilliant and can read the literature as well as anyone else. This is not some sacred text in the Vatican basement that only me, who's been anointed by the medical system, patriarchy gets to go read. It's bullshit. So, but we're trained to be siloed. We're trained to be myopic. We're trained to look at our organ system because that's how you prosper in medicine. The further you go in specialty, the more money you make, the more specialized you are with your drugs, and the more specialized you are with your procedures. And everybody in medicine knows, and this is not to say anything about doctors. Like, doctors I have met in training, postgraduate, are invariably intelligent and well-meaning. It's the system that kind of puts us this way. But the way to make money in medicine is to be a proceduralist, to do a cath, to do a colonoscopy. That's how you end up with a better life as a physician. My dad was an internist. He got killed, like, not literally, but he worked himself to the bone, because the internists are some of the smartest doctors because they have to know everything. But the way to really prosper in medicine financially is to become a specialist. And then you just know your one little, inch wide, mile deep thing, but then you don't understand how everything connects. So the medical system is built in a way that I think doesn't serve patients. We're not talking as specialties. We're not thinking about how all these things connect. And really, there's no specialty that owns metabolic dysfunction. If anybody does, it's an endocrinologist. But I'll tell you what, like, they're not going to understand metabolic dysfunction connecting with autoimmunity or connecting with atherosclerosis, because then you're over at the cardiologist, and then metabolic dysfunction can connect with depression, and then you're over at the psychiatrist, and you're like, holy shit, man. Like, you're just this pinballing around. Like, it doesn't serve patients well, which is why, who knows how we'll change it. But I think that there needs to be a lot more crosstalk and integration of these specialties so that doctors begin to see how it's all connected. There's not 76,000 diagnoses in medicine. in my opinion. It's like there is metabolic dysfunction and a few other ones. And if we can understand how to correct those, we can affect a lot of lives positively in a massive way. It's crazy.
Yeah, one of the examples I saw that was kind of I don't know, like a flagship example of like a call to authority was when you went on the doctor's show. And I was disgusted, dude. I was like, at the time, I think you were just like starting to get like your social media going and kind of like getting a hype train behind you. It was like the carnivore diet guy. And how did that opportunity come about? And did you know they were gonna like blindside the shit out of you going into it?
So I had two friends, two sisters that I met through social media, Sarah and Ashley Armstrong, who had like essentially both been diagnosed with lupus and amenorrhea. They had high titers of ANA. They had malar rashes. They had essentially lupus-like syndromes of autoimmunity. They tried like vegan diets and that didn't help. And then they tried carnivore and it actually really improved their autoimmunity. Their journey was long. They both actually were able to regain reproductive function when they actually started including more carbohydrates in their diet after carnivore. But cutting out the plant foods was significantly beneficial for their autoimmune condition. And they were eating some raw food. And so the Daily Mail got a hold of it and was like trying to make this spectacle of, oh my God, these crazy sisters who may or may not have a history of an eating disorder are eating this raw food to cure their autoimmune disease. Well, guess what? It actually really did help their autoimmune disease. And then the doctors, of course, wanted to have them on. And they were savvy enough to know, like, this is a setup. Like, these doctors don't really want to interview us. They want to make an example of us and highlight the fact that we've had eating disorders and sort of tell people, like, don't do this crazy thing. They definitely ate cooked food, but they were eating some like steak tartare and maybe some raw liver, and the Daily Mail and the doctors. So they knew me, and I was interested in the carnivore diet at the time. And they said, hey, will you come on the doctors with us? I was living in San Diego at the time. And so, yeah, I went to LA in person. They couldn't come in person. So I go to LA. I've never been on network television. You get there at like 6 a.m. and they're like, the producer comes in. She's like, well, they want to do like a little debate. And I was like, great. Like, I sent you guys 20 studies and a bibliography that I'm going to cite during this thing. Like, we'll do a debate. We're like, okay. And they want to bring in another doctor. I was like, how many doctors are going to be debating me? Like, they want to bring in Joel Kahn, who's a well-known vegan doctor. So they're going to bring in him. I'm like, they've got like four doctors and a lawyer on the stage, a doctor in the audience with me. So it's like five.
That lawyer is fucking brutal, dude.
She was brutal, man. Doesn't look very healthy or happy.
No.
And then they want to bring in a vegan cardiologist who's on Zoom. And then I'm in the audience. And apparently they had like applause tracks and they were cueing the audience behind me. And anyway, and then Ashley and Sarah are on the TV. So they're on Zoom. Joel Kahn's on Zoom. I'm there like just by myself with like 5 doctors. And then they proceeded they fucking teed off, dude. It was crazy. It was such a good learning experience. But yeah, like the doctor in the audience just throws a big fit and they're all like cool and calm. And they like ask one like respectful question. So Dr. Saladino, what makes you interested in a carnivore diet? Or why would you think this is good? And as soon as I got done speaking, they just started teeing off. It was like, boom, 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 boom. They wouldn't let me talk. There were pieces that were edited out where I was like, you know, guys, like I sent you a list of references. We haven't looked at a single reference. Did you read any of my references? Like I came here to debate and I'm getting railroaded. And they were like, oh no, you're not getting railroaded. And yeah, they question your credentials. So it's like, what the fuck? Like, she's like, the lawyer's like, who are you to discuss this diet? I'm like, who am I? Who are you? Like, who is anybody? I'm a guy who read the studies. Like, I learned how to read.
Yeah, she's like a fat lawyer sitting there. Like, how's that? Like, who are you to tell you to not talk about it?
And the whole thing is comical because here we have 2 women whose autoimmune disease got better, and they just wanted to throw in stuff like, well, they're going to get gout or they're going to get colon cancer. And of course, a daytime television show isn't the place where you actually look at the literature and go down the rabbit holes looking at, well, actually, metabolic dysfunction is the primary cause of, you know, gout and uric acid, not necessarily organ meats if you're metabolically healthy. Anyway, it was pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I would say to people, I'd watch it, but at the same time, like, it'll probably just annoy you if you watch it. So maybe don't. It was, like you did a good job of staying composed though. And, not getting, letting it get the best of you. And their, I don't know, demeanor, I think just you can tell even in the comment section on their own channel, like their demeanor came across very poorly in general to the audience, to like the actual audience watching the video, not the fake audience in the fucking thing. That it was, I don't know. I think it was a win overall for you at the end of the day.
I didn't feel like it was a win at the time, but I'm glad it was. I really was like, man, I was unprepared. I got railroaded. And the whole story, I'll just tell the story. So the lady in the audience with me was Melina Jampolis. She's an internist. And after the TV show, I walked back up, we go to our dressing rooms, and I walk into her dressing room. I'm like, hey, you know, there's so many studies. And she just starts yelling at me. I was like, whoa, they had to call security. And I was like, whoa, okay. And then I see her again outside, and the producer's there, and she's like, guys like you that are like handsome, they're charismatic, they get a following. And she was like, you deserve that. And I was like, I deserve to get railroaded? I was like, what are you talking about? They had to call security again. She's like losing her shit in the parking lot.
Jesus.
Yeah, it was really pretty crazy. And then the producer's saying stuff like, oh, there's no vitamin K in animal foods. And I'm like, what are you like? Have you heard of vitamin K? Like, what are you guys don't even know what you're talking about. Like at this point, there was no science. It was just like, we're going to make this guy look bad. So anyway, it was crazy, but
at least I think their idea, like a TV producer, I'm assuming, is in such like a old school mentality. They probably thought this was going to be like a win against you, and I think it was like a net loss ultimately, for sure, because I think more people were like, oh, maybe this guy, he's the only one who doesn't seem insane right now. So like maybe there's some viability to it.
Man, I'm glad it looked that way, because I was just kind of like incredulous the whole time and like, what are we doing? Oh my God. And then of course I wanted to debate them after. I was like, you know, Melina, come on my podcast. Let's have a real debate. The other guy, Travis Stork, come on my podcast. Nobody would even engage. And then I think they actually dissolved. So like everybody on this crew was let go. And now the Doctors is based out of, I think, New York, and there's like a single doctor. So like I don't think it had anything to do with my episode, but they dissolved the show after that season.
Oh wow. Who's like the head host guy? Like I've seen him in every single episode seemingly.
Travis Stork.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And he was on social media. He might have his own podcast now. Maybe we can convince him like, hey man, let's do a debate, you know, because he's the one like throwing up his hands and having a tantrum. Like everybody knows, you know, that plant foods are good. And I'm just like, well, you know, like maybe there's benefits, but let's talk about it. And here's why I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, like even like we're doing a podcast right now, and like I don't necessarily like even follow that, you know, ideology myself, where like I have, you know, vegetables and I have certain things in my diet that are, you know, plant-based, but it's not like we can't have a reasonable, intelligent discussion about it and, you know, go over the pros and cons of everything. And it's kind of hard, I feel like, to debate the nutrient density of like organ meats, for example, like unless you have some like, you know, like religious issue with it, or like, I don't know, something from like that's kind of like an like a outlier issue. Like ultimately it is kind of like clear as day that there is, you know, most people would benefit from inclusion of it in some capacity, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, you know, the other inequality that I think is so illustrative is the fact that there are this unique set of nutrients that only occur in animal foods. Some people might say there's a unique set of nutrients that only occur in plant foods, and we can talk about that counter argument. But, you know, I mean, creatine, carnitine, choline, carnosine, anserine, taurine, B12, K2, like the list goes on, riboflavin, like you can't really get these in any appreciable quantity in plant foods very easily. So if you want those things, you should include animal foods in your diet. That's a huge step for most people. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is if you look at, and this is probably something your audience is very aware of, like, you know, how do you saturate your muscles with creatine? A clearly well-studied ergogenic substance. It's 5 grams a day, right? Like that's the chronic, or 20 grams a day for a week. Well, how do you get 5 grams a day of creatine? Well, you can eat a kilogram of meat per day. Like, okay, like maybe a lot of us could benefit by eating more meat. I'm not saying we all have to eat a kilogram of meat per day, but if we want to, I mean, that's probably for a 70 kilogram or a 75 kilogram male. For me, like we talked about, I'm getting a kilogram of meat per day. And believe me, if I gave a kilogram of meat to the Hadza, they would eat it every single freaking day. Like in the Hadza and the Kung, it's like the amount of meat eaten is only proportional to the success of their hunts. They'll eat all the meat they can get. So I think a lot of people fear meat, but there's an interesting sort of biological optimization there around muscle performance that is 5 grams of creatine a day. Like that's a good thing to go on, you know? But many would say like, oh, it's that much meat is bad for you. And that's where I get into like interesting debates for people.
So that kilogram, like what is it broken down to? Like how much is muscle, how much is liver, how much is heart, etc.? Like do you have like a proportion you stick to, or is it just like whatever you feel like?
No, it's usually about 2 pounds of meat and then a few ounces of organs per day.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I heart is easy to eat. I can eat 2 or 3 ounces of heart at a meal, slice off a couple of pieces of testicle, 2 ounces of testicle, like I said, an ounce, half an ounce of liver, and whatever else I've got, half an ounce or an ounce of intestine or whatever. Or sometimes if I don't have it, I'll use desiccated stuff.
And what's your like go-to like muscle meat? Like, do you have a favorite, or like how do you decide what to have?
You know, in Costa Rica, I really like the ground beef. It's fatty, it's cheap, it's really flavorful. So I'll eat a lot of ground beef. Here in the States, I can get a little bit better ribeyes. For whatever reason, the ribeyes in Costa Rica are kind of blanks. They don't have a lot of marbling or like something about the way they feed the cows, different species too. So when I'm in the States, I'll eat a ribeye if I can get it. It's good. But man, I'm a simple man. I'll eat good ground beef every day. And everybody can afford that. Or mostly everybody could afford that. I mean, $6-7 a pound for grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef, if you believe that, which I think is a good thing for humans for a lot of ways, and the environment and ecosystems, you can make it affordable. Because I think people have this incorrect notion that I eat ribeyes and that it's $50 a day in meat, and that's not true. Most of what I eat is ground beef.
You don't drain the fat of the ground beef at all? You think the fat component is totally, fine as long as you're metabolically healthy?
Oh yeah, I save the fat, man. I'm going to eat as much fat as I can because, I mean, beneficial components in fat-soluble vitamins and minerals. Stearic acid is a fatty acid that I'm super fascinated by. Odd chain fatty acids, all that stuff is fat soluble. Like I want that fat. I don't worry about it at all. And I cook on a grill. So I have like an infrared grill. So some of the fat's going to go down, but I get the fattiest meat that I can.
So obviously the lipid, like hypothesis or whatever the, idea around what a lot of cardiologists would suggest is, the main risk factor of cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis. Everyone's kind of worried about, like, I think the LDL where you can't build plaque is like 70 supposedly or something ridiculously low. And I've heard you say, I think it was on Rogan, you said you've been up to like 500 at one point of LDL.
Not now, but in the past. Yeah.
So like, obviously people can hear both sides of the coin. They hear people say, like you saying, you shouldn't be worried about it as long as you're metabolically healthy. And then other individuals are like, keep that shit low. It obviously there's some sort of like, I don't know, like it's hard to just take at face value, like what you say over what like a bunch of other people say who are credentialed and whatnot, of course. So like people who are trying to hedge against the probability that there might be like some risk, but also like aren't totally in this camp where it's like suppress it to nothingness. And they're somewhere in the middle and they're trying to incorporate, like, I feel like this is going to be the majority of people watching. They're kind of like mindful of it. They're not totally buying into the idea that LDL equals heart disease. But at the same time, they're like cautious enough to not just be like, well, I have a 300 LDL, like I'm fine as long as I'm, exercising and I'm lean. What kind of biomarkers should somebody be looking at on their blood work in order to assess any kind of like the actual markers that you would think are relevant to plaque development? Like, should you be looking at C-reactive protein, fibrinogen, like, I don't know, like TMAO, like what would you be looking at as far as risk factors in addition to like, your NMR lipoprofile stuff?
Yeah. I mean, the NMR lipoprofile is actually less valuable than it's made out to be. Your particle size, maybe, but in some semblance of order of importance, I would start with fasting insulin because then you're going to know if you're metabolically healthy. And you could also triangulate that with a continuous glucose monitor and look at your postprandial levels. It's going to take a little more education to understand how to read a CGM and to know what glycemic variability is good. But some measure of your insulin sensitivity and metabolic health is paramount. Fasting insulin.
What would you want to see as like a healthy fasting insulin?
Less than 5 micro IU per ml. Okay. Yeah. Do you know what yours is?
Let me pull it up. I have it here.
So what's interesting about this is that the normal range for fasting insulin goes up to 24 for many labs, or 16, which is massively disordered.
Yeah, I can't even imagine waking up with like a 20 and being like, "Oh yeah, I'm good."
It's healthy. Yeah. It's a antiquated test that is so powerful that we're misusing. But yeah, HSCRP is important. Fibrinogen is important. Some people would say LPPLA2, but LPPLA2 is really a metric. It's going to track with LDL and ApoB. And then there's another metric you can get from a lab called Boston Heart called oxidized phospholipids on ApoB, which will give you a much better sense of oxidized LDL than a traditional oxidized LDL test. Traditional oxidized LDL tests are really inaccurate. Again, they're just a proxy for ApoB and the LDL number. And so while you're looking for that, I'll expound a little bit on the LDL stuff for people. This is a whole podcast in itself, and I've gone down this rabbit hole many times in my podcast. Basically, the LDL molecule, it's a lipoprotein. It's essential for human life. So it doesn't make sense to me at a high level intuitively why it would also be killing us. It could be a concentration effect, but then you're looking at like kinetics and Brownian motion, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either, because if you do the numbers, LDL is massive no matter whether you're 70 milligrams per deciliter or 250 milligrams per deciliter. We're talking 10 to the 15th LDL particles either way. And, maybe, 100 versus 200 is 10 to the 15th or 10 to the 16th, but 10 to the 15th LDL particles is like as many cells in your body. So it doesn't like just the argument to me that like if you get down to 7 times 10 to the 15th particles of LDL, you're not going to get atherosclerosis. But if you have 10 times 10 to the 15th particles of LDL, you are. It's like, man, that's a lot of LDL no matter how you do it. And we know that the spaces between the endothelial cells are big enough to allow the LDL in and out. There's something else going on there. I think there's something else changing the context. And that to me is metabolic health. And there's tons of good evidence here to support this assertion that ApoB is not the ultimate arbiter. That is essentially LDL of atherosclerosis. It can correlate, but is it the fireman or is it the arsonist? I don't think LDL particles are directly atherogenic to the human endothelium. That doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think there's enough data to support that. Now, again, deep rabbit hole. I'll hit a couple highlights here. There's definitely case studies of people with familial hypercholesterolemia, LDLs 400 to 600 for their whole life with zero atherosclerosis. So if LDL is causing atherosclerosis, why is this guy an outlier? And there's multiple cases of that. If LDL is directly causing injury to the endothelium, why do you only accumulate atherosclerosis in the arteries and not the veins? They all have endothelium. The concentration of LDL is the same in all of them. There's something else going on. And many people would say, oh yeah, well, the endothelium has to be injured. Okay, well then if the endothelium has to be injured, LDL isn't really injuring the endothelium because there's the same amount of LDL in a vein as there is in an artery. Then you have all kinds of interesting medical anomalies. There's a condition called glycogen storage disease 1A. I think it's von Gerke's disease, where people have elevated levels of LDL, but they don't have elevated levels of atherosclerosis. Okay, so what's going on there? There's many examples of this. There's on the flip side, there's familial Dunnigan hyperlipidystrophy, where people have normal levels of LDL, but they have accelerated atherosclerosis. And in the case of familial Dunnigan hyperlipidystrophy, like that one is fascinating because there's a mutation that causes them to be insulin resistant. So they distribute their fat. So lipodystrophy is something where people have increased visceral adipose tissue, but very lean extremities. They don't have visceral fat. They don't have subcutaneous fat. That's all visceral fat. They have like a total.
Yeah, I did a video on a guy who was like 2% body fat and ate like 10,000 calories a day or something. And he had like an insanely fatty liver and like issues, but he looked like super lean.
Except the visceral adipose tissue. So this Dunnigan lipodystrophy, they have insulin resistance, but not elevated LDL. Guess what? They get massive atherosclerosis. It's very aggressive. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then you can look at cohorts of people, Framingham and Haynes. And if you stratify those cohorts by some metric that gives you a sense of insulin sensitivity, whether that's HDL, fasting insulin, triglycerides, whatever, all of those might give you a sense of insulin sensitivity, aka metabolic dysfunction. You see the risk of LDL and heart disease essentially vanish or is massively attenuated. So, for instance, in the Framingham cohort, if you have a low HDL, which is a proxy for insulin resistance, then LDL tracks very well with cardiovascular disease. But if you have an HDL of 65 or 85, most of those people are pretty freaking insulin sensitive, milligrams per deciliter. There's essentially no relationship or a massively attenuated relationship between LDL and cardiovascular disease. So there's something else going on here. That's very high level brush with all of that. But I think there's enough evidence to say, I don't think we can prove that ApoB containing particles, which is mostly LDL, but also includes things like chylomicrons, et cetera, are directly injurious to the endothelium. And I think that details matter here, because if you're saying LDL causes atherosclerosis, you have to prove to me that LDL injures the endothelium and is enough on its own to cause it. And I don't think that's true. I think there's something else going on.
So I know a lot of people watching this right now from my channel who use anabolics are freaking out because they hear you say low HDL and high LDL equals like metabolic dysfunction in general. And they're like, oh my God, like I'm fucked. And in general, like it seems like what we see in anabolic steroid users is they have like the androgen exposure causes an increase in what was it? I think it was there's the hepatic triglyceride lipase, and they end up with very low HDL levels. Like it's very rare to see somebody even on exogenous TRT that has a HDL over 50. So these individuals who can have heightened LDL and low HDLs concurrently, presumably these other biomarkers become the more accurate way to assess like metabolic health and overall propensity to plaque buildup, presumably.
Fasting insulin.
Like, it's like HDL, like it's weird because HDL, I understand the importance it has at like a mechanism role, but at the same time, even when you use things that increase HDL, like niacin and this and that, and you have like certain medications that increase HDL, they see like no difference in mortality or cardiovascular disease. So it seems like the main kind of like foundational thing you need to concern yourself with is the metabolic flexibility at the end of the day, as opposed to the transient, like on paper lipid parameters.
I would agree with that. I would be careful with the verbiage and say metabolic health rather than metabolic flexibility. I think you're talking about different things there. Because when somebody's metabolically flexible, I think of the ability to burn fat
out of keto or something.
Yeah, to burn fat and not become hypoglycemic. Yeah. But I want somebody to be metabolically healthy and insulin sensitive at all the tissues, and that's low fasting insulin. Because HDL, like I said, I was careful. HDL is a proxy for insulin sensitivity. It's not a direct metric all the time. And some people genetically have low HDL and they're perfectly insulin sensitive and do not develop atherosclerosis. And a lot of the drugs, the CETP inhibitors that were developed to raise HDL they were complete catastrophes. So it's not as simple as raising HDL. We know that.
Yeah. So for me, I found my blood work, and unfortunately my test, I took it. I remember it was when I was in Vegas and I was on a time crunch. I was traveling for business and doing some podcasts and stuff. And my insulin, it was taken like, I don't know, late afternoon. I definitely had at least one meal in me, but my insulin was 5.8, which I would think is pretty decent for having a meal in my system.
Yeah.
But my HDL is like, where is it? I don't know what it is, but it's probably, I know it's less than 40, but it's because of the exogenous TRT. And on paper, you'd be like, damn, like that's very bad. But I feel like you have to have some context, especially for individuals who are using hormones.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say get a fasting insulin. Less than 5 is ideal. Mine has pretty consistently been 3. You can back it up with a C-peptide. Mine is less than 0.5. And that's on honey and fruit and all kinds of things that people would sometimes say. I think that insulin-induced insulin resistance is very rare. Carbohydrate-induced insulin resistance from whole foods is very rare. And from processed sugar, there's a difference. But I think people could eat a lot of carbohydrates in a day and not become insulin resistant if it's from, white rice, sweet potatoes, fruit. Again, those are different levels, I think, for me, of desirability for people. But yeah.
You think white rice and potatoes are okay?
No, so like in order to create some sort of an ability for people to improve their diet and not be completely exclusive, I wanted to create a spectrum, right? So again, this is just
they're not like the worst offenders, but they're like,
well, sweet potatoes may be better than white potatoes, but again, this is just Paul Saladino's conceptualization. It's just my framework that hopefully will be helpful to people. I think of the grains, which are seeds, white rice is probably the least offensive to people. No gluten, probably could still cause issues in some people, but probably not the worst one. I don't include it. I don't think it's ideal, but that's just my paradigm. White potatoes are the nightshade genus that I think has a higher potential observationally, and at least in terms of botany, to cause autoimmune problems for people. And we know that raw white potatoes have these little green, they have the little green sprouts with solanine and all these problems. So I would say sweet potatoes over white potatoes. But again, roots in general, I think, like the idea is that they are going to be defended. They're going to have defense chemicals. We don't fully know what's going on. If you're thriving, change nothing about your diet. If you're not thriving, question your assumptions and keep learning.
So I want to be mindful of your time. Like, do you still have time to keep going? Because I have more stuff.
I do, but I probably need to go eat dinner soon. We're getting close to 3 hours. Holy shit!
Yeah. No, yeah, I was expecting we could easily push 3. So I don't know if you have another like 15 or so.
Let's do another 15. I love it.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So
can I show before we go? Can I show the pictures of this guy with the alopecia areata?
Yeah, sure.
So this is actually pretty cool. So this is August 2017. You can see this guy's beard. Yeah. This is just N of 1. And then you can see him. This is the back of his head, right? It's alopecia areata. And then he goes on to say that, like, I think here at the end, he shows a picture of his beard, like nice. full beard. So that's pretty significantly improved, right? Mm-hmm. And then here's the back of his head. So you can see these patches like filling in. And this is super cool, like just an N of 1, but I think it argues strongly in favor of the idea that dietary change could be really impactful for autoimmunity. In this case, he did carnivore, he cut out plant foods. Let's go further down the rabbit hole. Joe Rogan's talked about his vitiligo, which is this melanin containing cells in the skin. He said on air, I actually want to ask him about it the next time I see him, that gets better when he does carnivore too. And he's doing animal-based now. He's including some fruit. He had improvements with that, I think, relative to strict carnivore. So cool. Thanks for letting me share that stuff.
No, yeah, absolutely. As far as like the fruit, like what, and like the food matrix of it being like, obviously fructose in like a juice format is not ideal compared to if you're just like eating a berry or like a banana or whatever. And it's like has the, fibrous component of it, presumably. So it's like slowing the, spike in glucose. Like, is there any issue with that? Like for somebody who wants to hypothetically make a smoothie instead of like eat it whole and it's like pre-digested a little bit by like blending it, is that problematic?
I don't think so. I mean, you could test it by doing smoothies, checking your fasting insulin, checking your liver fat, getting a look at your visceral fat long-term. That's kind of an interesting experiment. But so what I'll say is this, there's a conflation, there's a nutritional reductionism, and people see studies with sucrose or fructose, processed fructose removal. And not surprisingly, we see improvements in inflammation, improvements in liver fat, improvements in insulin sensitivity. And they conflate that with fruit. But you can do the same studies with fruit. So Rick Johnson has done this. He's been on Atia's podcast. And actually, I just sent this study to Joe the other day because I thought that was so fascinating. I could probably pull it up here real quick in a moment. But he's done a randomized controlled trial where they did fructose reduction and they see improvements. And then in the fructose, in one arm of the reduced processed fructose group, they give them back 400 to 600 calories a day of fruit, and they see no negativity. So they don't lose any of the benefits of reducing processed fructose with 400 to 600 calories of fruit per day. That's a lot of fruit. Like that's hundreds of grams of carbohydrates from fruit a day, or at least over 100 if you're talking 4 calories per gram. So that's really interesting. And I think it speaks to this notion, which we see over and over, which is that it seems like voodoo or like hand wavy, but foods in the whole food form have more information. We see this with honey. Like you can give someone honey and they have increased nitric oxide precursors in their urine, and the endothelium function gets better if the honey is good. And then if you give somebody sugar, which many people would say, oh, honey is just processed sugar, all those things go the opposite direction. You can see the same thing in animal models where you can give rats or mice sugar and they have all sorts of metabolic issues, and you give them honey and they actually have the reverse. It's pretty wild stuff. So I think that there's some sort of informational component. You can go further down the rabbit hole. I believe it's Josh Rabinowitz has done the studies with mice and rats and gavaging fructose. And there's, or maybe it's actually humans also, the intestines have a pretty significant ability to shield the
And
liver.
gavaging is just like sticking a thing in their mouth that orally administers it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They just like shoot it
Okay,
in
because
there.
people are probably like, "What the fuck is
It's gavage.
gavage?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
gavage. Yeah. But you can see that like they, on these animal models, they got up to 1 gram of fructose per kilogram of the animal before it was overflowing and going to the liver. The intestines had the ability to shield and transform the fructose into glucose, lactic acid, and maybe another metabolite. So that's quite interesting that like you would imagine that fruit could do that more than like a sugary soda or something where you max out that level. So I think, and high level, we know this. Like some people probably believe that soda is not harmful for humans, but I think most people invariably see health improvements when they cut out processed sugar. And that is, I think, very powerful and very easy to do for people. And it's a simple thing. But similarly, don't fear fruit. And I've done a whole podcast on this. I think it's great for humans. It's colorful, it's sweet. Evolutionarily, it makes sense. Hunter-gatherers go crazy for it when they can get it, and do it within reason. I'm probably on the upper end of what most people would do because I'm trying to get my carbohydrates now from what I would consider to be the least toxic plant sources. So I'm not using roots. I'm not using grains. Some people can choose to use those, see how you do. And I'm using fruit and honey. So I'm eating, multiple pieces of fruit per day and some maybe 4 tablespoons of honey per day. So
for like a normal person who has access to like a regular grocery store and they're trying to be cost effective and they get like a bag of frozen fruit, for example, like, do you still see that as like a reasonable, I don't know, approach to getting fruit in, or should they be spending way more on organic, fresh, like every time?
No, I mean, do what you can, right? I think that certain fruits appear to have more pesticides, but do the best you can. And
like the nutrient density, you don't see degraded into nothingness when it's frozen.
No, I think it's still okay. I think it's better the fresher it is, but I don't think it's not worthless. And yeah, frozen fruit is good if you want to get frozen cherries or frozen peaches or whatever. And the nice thing about being in Costa Rica a lot of the time is we get amazing tropical fruit. So I can get papaya, mango, banana, guanabana, which is a soursop. I can get pineapple, and it's all right there. It's mostly local and it's available frequently during different seasons, mangoes. So it's interesting. I mean, the tropics are a great place for fruit. And then honey is good. Raw honey is a great adjunct for people. See how you do with it.
So when you're trying to assess like backfilling micronutrient needs, and you find, okay, the heart has taurine, CoQ10, this organ has this and this, like, do you actually like plug in these things into like a tracker, like chronometer or something, to assess like how far you're getting in each micronutrient, and then like assessing your ratios of them to figure out like how to optimize? Because like for example, I know Liver King on the DeLauer podcast, he was talking about how he wasn't getting enough vitamin E with his carnivore diet, so he added in nuts, which I know you're not like a nuts guy. So like where do you see like the like certain foods, it seems like maybe the outliers, but certain foods are like, it's harder to get certain vitamins from meat and organs. So like, where do you go for things like vitamin E or some of the more like outlier things?
E is a good example because I remember Rhonda was on Rogan many years ago. They were talking about the carnivore diet, and she was like, where do you get vitamin E on a carnivore diet? Well, guess what? Like I think that the USDA stuff is probably not super accurate, and vitamin E is in animal foods and it's fat soluble. I'm pretty sure animal fat is full of vitamin E. And whenever I've tested my vitamin E levels, they're high normal. They're like topped off. And I don't do vitamin E supplements. I don't do nuts. Like if you look at the USDA, people would say, oh, you're not getting enough vitamin E. And I'm thinking, man, that animal fat, I'm pretty sure has plenty of vitamin E. And I can show you on my labs of multiple people I've worked with, I've never seen someone eating, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight in animal foods with moderate amounts of fat on it be vitamin E deficient. So I would disagree with Liver King here. He's off base. I don't think nuts are great because they're a seed and they're defended. So I don't think you need nuts for vitamin E. I have put it into a few programs and you can see the nutrients. There's a guy, I forget his name, I'll think of it in a second, who actually did this on my diet previously and looked at the nutrients as well. And some things come up. People would say like, oh, you don't get enough calcium when I wasn't doing dairy. Now I have raw dairy. Or you don't get enough manganese. And it's like, look, I'm pretty sure liver has some manganese. And when I test my manganese, it's well within normal. So I don't think I'm manganese deficient. So a lot of like the little details, as far as I've been able to dig into it with myself and people I work with, it's never seemed to be a major issue if you're getting meat, some organs, And now, like I said, I feel better with some carbohydrates from fruit, honey. I don't think there's anything missing there that you need to get from a vegetable. You can think about boron. There's boron in avocados. There's boron in bananas. There's boron in honey. It's been interesting to try and see like what would I miss, and then you actually look deeper into it, and you're like, actually, it's right there. Some people would say magnesium, but look, magnesium is super fascinating. Like nobody gets 400 milligrams of magnesium per day on any diet that's bioavailable without supplementation. So that RDA has got to be a little bit wonky. And I think that so many of the good sources of magnesium are not that bioavailable because they're clearly in nuts and seeds, which are going to have, molecules like oxalates and phytic acid that are going to chelate the magnesium. I mean, the lowest magnesium levels I've ever had were when I was on a vegan diet. I had like cramping and multiple tests showing really low magnesium. Well, I had almonds and kale. And what do you want me to do? Where am I going to get my magnesium from? So there's 100 milligrams of magnesium in a pound of muscle meat. Okay, great. I'm eating 2 pounds a day. That's 200 milligrams of magnesium. That's probably very bioavailable, perhaps akin to heme iron versus non-heme iron. There's not a porphyrin ring encasing the magnesium or something, but I've got the suspicion that it's pretty darn bioavailable to get these minerals from animal foods relative to plant foods because there's not these plant molecules, oxalates, phytic acid that are chelating that are in the plant sort of biochemistry and operating system.
Do you think you get 4,700 milligrams of potassium per day from?
Oh, I definitely now from fruit. I do.
Okay. Because I know that I would be thinking in my head, like, where would that primarily come from on carnivore based?
Yeah, from fruit. Yeah. When I was carnivore and eating meat, I probably wasn't getting that much potassium as well. But meat is also a pretty good source of potassium, not 4,700 milligrams of potassium.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And what do you do for water? Do you use like one of those super advanced, like reverse osmosis, like filters and then add minerals back in, or you just use like a normal kitchen filter? Like, how do you get the highest quality water?
Good question. I mean, I wish I could journey to the center of the earth and find like the perfect spring with like Vestal virgins and bikinis next to it and just drink all that. But I've been thinking a lot about water recently. For a while, I used the Berkey. I'm not sure the Berkey's getting as much out as I want. So I've started experimenting with distillation and reverse osmosis and then just remineralizing back. That's probably the best thing for most people to do.
And how do you remineralize as like a carnivore guy? Do you use like an electrolyte supplement or something?
Yeah, you could even just go to the ocean and get a little ocean water, or you could probably just get your minerals from like a good sea salt. So I don't even know if you have to remineralize because you're thinking these are trace minerals. And I'm thinking, well, this meat I'm eating has trace minerals and this fruit I'm eating has trace minerals and this salt I'm eating has trace minerals. Do I really need trace minerals in my water? I don't know. I should do it as distilled water, pure reverse osmosis, like never. And I'm not super dogmatic about that stuff. When people ask, I will say, yeah, I don't really take supplements other than desiccated organs from hardened soil if I need the organs. But in this case, you're right. That would be the one exception now that I'm experimenting with water if I'm remineralizing water and doing that experiment.
Do you have any like crazy biohacks that you do, or are you just like very like naturally ancestrally consistent? Like you mentioned the sleep hygiene stuff, the glasses, the, blackout blinds, etc. But like, you go to Ben Greenfield's house, for example, I'm sure the guy has like fucking $100,000 of equipment of like random stuff. Like, do you do any of that shit?
No, man. No. I mean, I've got a friend with a sauna. We got a wood-fired sauna in Costa Rica. He's actually got like a metal stove. We throw wood in it. We sweat. We get ice. I love contrast therapy. I just like the way it makes my mind feel. It feels good to chill. I spend time in the ocean. I like getting sun on my skin. I'm obviously pretty tan. I don't do anything crazy. I don't have any crazy things. I've experimented with hyperbaric oxygen in the past. It's something I might look into more, but that's kind of fascinating to me. I love flotation tanks when I can get in and meditate, but I'm kind of anti biohacking in general. I like the simple stuff, man. And I feel so fortunate to get to spend a lot of time in a beautiful place.
Okay. Last question, lean mass hyper responders and in bodybuilders too, just as a side tangent quick for somebody who's trying to hit high carbohydrate intake needs as a bodybuilder, because this is something that you're going to find, and I know this is probably like pre-honey fruit era, Paul, but before you've spoken how you think that a carnivore diet could be just as conducive to muscle building like in a state of keto, which I think now you would probably say like there's no fucking way.
Probably disagree with that. I disagree with that, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, though, in the context of like these intellogenic cascades that I referred to earlier being so critical for growth factor production, proliferation, and leading to anabolic processes downstream, what would you suggest for a bodybuilder who's like pushing the carbohydrate vector really hard? Because oftentimes it's not them needing to push the protein to like, 2 grams per pound or anything crazy. It's more like 1 gram to 1.25 per pound of body weight, but it's the carbs that get to like 500, 600, 700 grams when they're getting really, really big. Do those individuals just eat honey and fruit, or would you advise like starting to implement things like rice and stuff like that in order to hit those needs?
I think to get 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, you should think about rice, yeah, think about some white rice. And you know what? Like if you're interested and you're at this level and you want to try and think about this, check your fasting insulin, get a pre and a post DEXA, look at your visceral fat. Tell me the results because I'm so curious. Like it would be fascinating to show that 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. And I'm not convinced that it would increase visceral fat, but I think we should do some, casual experiments like 500 grams a day visceral of carbohydrates from a combination of fruit, honey, and rice. I wouldn't get all 500 grams of carbohydrates from rice because fruit is delicious, but at that level, you're putting so much in your stomach that I don't really understand what these guys are doing. I think you might need to get rice. Honey is great. You could eat a lot of freaking honey, man. Like it's probably not cost effective, but you could definitely eat a pound of honey a day. I could do that. No problem, Derek. Like I would, it's so easy to eat a hot pound. I don't think I've ever eaten a pound of honey in a day, but if you challenge me to do it, I could do it.
Now, would you still recommend that much sugar intake for somebody who has a higher base level of oxidative stress from the anabolics and whatnot too? Because I don't really know, I don't actually know what leads to plaque development in terms of like inflammation, oxidative stress, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what cofactors lead to this manifestation of it realistically. So like in an individual who has like a base level of stress from exogenous hormones, should they be mindful of that and maybe be like lesser on the sugar vector or things that are, I don't know.
It's a good question. I'd say test, right? Check your HSCRP, check other metrics. Fibrinogen is another good metric. Check other metrics of oxidative stress, GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase, watch your liver enzymes, do all that stuff while you're doing it and kind of triangulate in that special situation. I don't think honey is intrinsically inflammatory. But maybe at 500 grams, it becomes an overload. Maybe not. Experiment. When I was in Tanzania, if we found a hive of honey, the 3 hunters that I was with would eat 90% of it and then give like a little bit to the rest of the tribe. They would just go ham on it in the backcountry and eat all of it. They would eat a ton. We were just eating like these huge honeycombs and they would just eat it. That's how it is out there. Like if you get honey in the backcountry, it's yours. You bring back maybe like 1/10 for the tribe.
Okay. Last question. So the lean mass hyper-responder thing, like these are individuals who seem to have high LDLs, but they are otherwise like very athletic looking and, jacked in some cases. Like I have one natural who I'm looking at his blood work now. He is like one of the premier faces of like natural bodybuilding, I guess. Like he's a very, very accomplished natural athlete and looks amazing. He maintains like sub 10% body fat year round with normal looking testosterone levels. Like he doesn't seem to have any like significant gonadotropin suppression or anything. And his LDL is clinically high. Like somebody might tell him like, oh, you should be on a statin or a ezetimibe and like maybe get that down. I have another friend too, who has, I don't even know what you would call this, if it's still a hyper responder or not, but some individuals that are like, their total testosterone is super physiological naturally, where they'll walk around with like a 1500, 1600 total. And I think his feedback loop is just like something about it is messed up. He actually has an adrenal tumor, which they found via, I think it was an ultrasound or something, or an MRI. And for him though, his gonadotropins are always, his LH is always high. His total T is like 1600, 1700 almost every single time. And his LP little a and total cholesterol and LDL are like through the fucking roof. But he's like an athletic, lean, healthy guy. You can tell seemingly that his predisposition also drives his entrepreneurial like behavior. Like he's a very accomplished individual. And it's hard to kind of look at it and be like, hey, dude, like you should probably get on like a PCSK9 inhibitor or something, when it might be the reason he has like these like hormone like advantages. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, is he going to end up with like ball cancer one day from all the LH, or like, I don't know what to tell him.
Has he had a calcium scan?
Not yet, but he's in his 30s. I wouldn't know if calcium would show up yet. Would it? Like
it could. I mean,
like, doesn't that take like years for calcification to actually manifest itself?
No, it does not. If the LDL is very high, most radiologists would say that if you're, how high did you say his LDL was?
I would have to pull that up. I actually have it. Just give me a sec. Sorry.
So most cardiac radiologists would say that a year or two of elevated LDL is enough to see meaningful plaque progression in the arteries. So your point is well taken. And Dave,
so you would just look at like what percentile they're in for their age bracket and then kind of extrapolate out, even though they're young.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you could, if he had any plaque in his early 30s, he would be in the 99th percentile. But it would be telling to say, hey, if this were the situation and his LDL has been high for years and he has a 0 calcium score, it's not perfect because it doesn't get uncalcified plaque. You could do a CT coronary angiogram, which is also a small amount, or it's not as much radiation as it used to be. You could do a CT coronary angiogram and confirm that and say, hey, this is an interesting case study. Like, just get a CTA or get a coronary scan every 2 years and be like, we don't see the progression of plaque in your arteries. Get a fasting insulin, wear a CGM. It would still be meaningful.
So LP little a was 93.6 with a reference interval of less than 75. His apolipoprotein B was 114. Let's see. Total test 1300, free test 22, both in nanograms per deciliter. So both clinically high. This was just his most recent one that I have.
Do you have a pure LDL in milligrams per deciliter?
Yeah, I'm getting up to it here. So I have LDL P is 1840, LDL-C is 150, which I guess isn't as bad as some of his previous ones that I've seen.
No,
that's actually not bad at all, right?
Lower than mine.
Yeah. Total cholesterol 215, small LDL-P 63, but his HDL is 55, triglycerides 71. Otherwise,
doesn't have a fasting insulin.
Oh, he has a fasting insulin too. I can find that.
That LDL is lower than mine.
His fasting insulin is only 2.
There you go. He's pretty metabolically healthy. So I think at this point, like those LDL numbers don't really blow my hair back, much at all. My LDL is usually 200, 220, 230. My triglycerides are low. My HDL is usually quite high, 85 for what it's worth. And my fasting insulin's low. So if I see that guy in clinic and he's worried, I might say, hey, get a coronary artery calcium scan, get a CTA, prove to yourself you have 0. If you don't have 0, take a different course. But before you I don't think many cardiologists would put this guy on a PCSK9 inhibitor with an LDL.
No, it must have been an old blood test I saw.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is different for sure.
Yeah, those have some pretty significant side effects too that could be problematic. So
do they?
Yeah,
I know they have side effects, but like I wasn't aware of like what they are.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at it. There were some significant concerns about PCSK9 inhibitors, but yeah, it's an interesting realm. So lean mass hyperresponder, as you say, is people who end up with, they're generally lean, but they end up with a high LDL and generally low triglycerides and a moderate or high HDL. So these are metabolically healthy people who have what Dave Feldman calls the triad of high LDL, low triglycerides, high HDL, and they're metabolically healthy. And so the question is, do they accumulate atherosclerosis at the same level as someone with an equivalent LDL who might be diabetic or less metabolically healthy? And that's a fascinating question, because if the answer is no, then the mainstream LDL paradigm needs revision, and that will change the face of medicine, because so many things in medicine are based around LDL. I mean, saturated fat is beneficial for humans hormonally. I'm sure you covered this on your channel, testosterone, so many things. And then all the things in saturated fat. We talked about stearic acid a little bit, odd chain fatty acids. But doctors won't tell people to eat animal fat because it's going to raise the LDL, and they will condone seed oils because they lower LDL, ignoring the fact that in interventional studies, which are small but out there, when you give people seed oils in exchange for saturated fat, the oxidized LDL goes up, the LP little a goes up, but the LDL goes down. That sounds bad from an oxidative stress perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of, I think, handicap in Western medicine and the way we see metabolic health and cholesterol around saturated fat and LDL. If we can let go of the LDL demon and think about LDL contextually, there may be some different dietary recommendations. And then I think we would understand things better. But Dave Feldman has a study ongoing now with Matt Buttigieg, I think is his name. I'm probably butchering the name of the cardiac radiologist who's doing the CTAs, but they have two cohorts. One is just a regular cohort and one is a cohort of lean mass hyperresponders. And they're comparing with CTAs over the course of a year to see how much the atherosclerosis progresses. And so when that study comes out, who knows? There's people on the panel who believe they will progress, and there's people who are neutral. And I don't think that they will progress as quickly as people would believe they would, or maybe not at all. But the clear thing they got from this preeminent cardiac radiologist was, they're going to progress. Like their LDLs 300, 400, 500, you're going to see atherosclerotic progression. And if they don't, there's going to be some really interesting questions about if the paradigm around LDL/ApoB is complete, or we really need to contextualize it. And I would argue for the latter.
Interesting. Hopefully it doesn't get, buried if the results are in favor of opposing the kind of standard paradigm.
Oh, it'll be a cannon blast if that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
But who knows? Yeah, we'll hear about it at least. But this metformin study, a lot of people are talking about this metformin study. I think there's questions about that one. Again, metformin is beneficial, but why don't we fix the diabetes at the root, or at least recommend that and not ignore the fact that another thing could be problematic for humans hormonally.
Okay, so we easily crushed 3 hours.
That was crazy.
I appreciate you staying on that long.
That was amazing,
I don't think I ever do less than 3 hours because I just get really into the weeds on stuff.
Oh, so, I had no idea. That's great.
Maybe I should have warned you ahead of time. But
I was like, oh, his videos are 45 minutes. I have no idea. It's like Rogan. That's freaking amazing.
No, yeah. So everyone, if you want to check out more about nose to tail nutrition, the kind of optimized way to go about eating ancestrally consistent or carnivore based, go check out Paul's channel. It's Carnivore MD, right? On YouTube.
Carnivore MD channel on YouTube, yeah.
As well on Instagram and all of the podcast platforms, presumably, and whatnot. And check him out there. Follow his stuff if you want to stay up to date on nutritional information. He's one of the leading, I would say, experts. If anyone's an expert, I would say it's you for sure in terms of staying up to date on the literature and whatnot, and kind of giving insight onto best practices for staying optimized. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Subscribe. I don't know if you want to give an outro for your channel too, or
I'm stoked we'll release it on my channel too. If you guys, I can't believe we did 3 hours. It's amazing you guys got to hang out with me and Derek for 3 hours. Thanks for having me on, brother. And check out Derek's channel, which is More Plates, More Dates. I really like his stuff as well. He's deep in the weeds, and as he said, he's really, I think, one of the guys doing the best job looking at TRT, looking at hormones, looking at endocrine stuff, and really being, I think, very candid about it, which I so appreciate about your stuff, really authentic about what you do and what works and what doesn't. And I always wonder what that thing in your background is. So you got to tell me.
It's a secret, dude. No one knows. There's a lot of theories about what is back here. And, the premier theory right now is I work in a sauna, so we're just gonna stick with that.
Oh my god, it's like this. I'm like, what is back there? That's so great.
Yeah, that was the first thing Joe mentioned too. He was like, I love your backdrop. It's just so simple. You have this little air conditioner thing. And I'm like, yeah.
I'm not gonna talk about what it is.
Yeah,
something from the 70s. That's fantastic, man. Well, I don't know if you ever get to the States, man. Hit me up. Let's eat a steak sometime.
Right on. Sounds good, man.
Thanks, brother.
All right, take it easy.